Hey there, tonight we're diving into the gritty resilience of Roman citizens during the barbarian invasions. What you're about to discover will shatter the myth that they merely cowered behind crumbling walls. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the bustling streets of Rome, and let me tell you, it's not quite the glorious empire of marble and might you've been led to believe. The year is 410 AD, and the Eternal City is a little less eternal and a lot more chaotic than you'd expect. Forget those glossy images of serene senators in togas. Rome's got problems, and they're not just barbarian-shaped. The economy is on the fritz. The streets are a mishmash of anxiety and anticipation. And the treasury, well, let's just say it's got more holes than a well-used colander. First off, we've got a currency issue. Rome's economy is suffering from a bout of inflation that makes your modern money woes look like pocket change. Emperors have been debasing currency faster than you can say denarius, and this is not just an accounting error. It's a full-blown economic migraine. Imagine this. You've got a coin in your hand, but instead of pure silver, it's more like a metallic, mutt with a silver coating thinner than a politician's promise. The value of money is slipping like a toga on a windy day, and prices are skyrocketing. Bread, your daily staple, costs more than your rent. And if you think taxes today are a pain, try living under Roman tax collectors who make the IRS seem like a benevolent charity. Now, while you're dodging financial ruin, let's not forget the barbarians knocking at the gates. The Visigoths, led by one Alaric, think of him as the original barbarian influencer, are about to make a grand entrance. Spoiler alert, they're not here for a friendly chat, but here's the kicker. Rome isn't the invincible fortress history textbooks sometimes paint it as. By this time, its military might is more myth than muscle. The legions, once the pride of the empire, are stretched thinner than a Roman road in the provinces, battling not just invaders, but also internal squabbles and political chaos. Speaking of political chaos, the late Roman Empire is a masterclass in dysfunction. Picture emperors who change more often than a runway model's wardrobe. In the century leading up to the sack of Rome, the empire saw over 20 different emperors. That's more regime changes than a soap opera, and just about as dramatic. Each of these leaders tried to fix the empire with quick fixes and band-aid solutions. But you can only patch a sinking ship so many times before you need to grab a life raft. And then there's the myth of Rome itself. The idea that it's a city that will last forever, unyielding and unbreakable. But reality was already giving this tale a good kicking long before Alaric showed up. The social fabric of Rome is fraying, with class divisions that make modern inequality look like a family squabble. The wealthy are hoarding wealth like it's going out of style, while the poor, well, they're just hoping to keep bread on the table, if they can afford it, of course. As for the famed Roman roads that once symbolized unity and power, they're now conduits of despair, as news of invasions travels faster than you'd like. By now, you might be wondering where all those grand Roman virtues have gone. The honor, the courage, the discipline, well, they're still there, sort of. But the truth is, even the most disciplined Roman citizen can't fight off a horde with a plummeting currency and a fractured society. And speaking of hordes, the Visigoths are not the mindless marauders of legend. They're more like a wandering nation, looking for a place to call home, driven by desperation as much as conquest. Alaric himself is a complex figure, part warrior, part negotiator, and fully aware of Rome's symbolic power. So here you are, a citizen of Rome, watching as the unthinkable becomes reality. The sack of Rome in 410 AD is a turning point, a historical punctuation mark that signals the end of one era and the chaotic beginning of another. The Visigoths plunder the city for 3 days, but they don't burn it to the ground. Contrary to some dramatic tales, it's less about destruction and more about making a statement. The old order is crumbling, and the world is shifting beneath your feet. In the aftermath, Rome is left in shock. The illusion of invincibility is shattered, and the empire must reckon with its vulnerabilities. The sack is both an end and a beginning, a harsh reminder that even the mightiest fall, a narrative as old as time, but freshly painful in the context of the mighty Rome. And yet, in this chaos and collapse, there's a strange sense of continuity. Rome, even as it's sacked, is still Rome, a city of contradictions, of resilience, of stories that refuse to die. As you sift through the ruins, both literal and metaphorical, remember this. History isn't just about what happens. It's about how people react, adapt, and survive in the face of overwhelming odds. The late Roman Empire is a study in survival, in the gritty reality behind the marble facade. So, while the barbarians may have breached the walls, the story of Rome is far from over. So, you've got the sack of Rome, a seismic event that felt like an empire-wide wake-up call, complete with the kind of hangover only history can provide. But let's pivot from the rubble and focus on what the Romans, these masters of adaptation, were doing to keep the wolves, or in this case, the Visigoths, at bay. Spoiler, it's not all gladius and glory. First up, let's talk fortified cities. Imagine you're a Roman citizen, tired of hearing the latest barbarian gossip of your morning bread and wine, if you can afford it. The Empire's once mighty legions aren't exactly around to tuck you in at night, so what do the powers that be suggest? Fortify. It's a classic last resort move, like duct taping a broken window during a hurricane. Towns and cities across the Empire started erecting walls thicker than a senator's ego, hoping to keep out those less-than-friendly neighbors. But here's the kicker. These walls weren't just about defense. They were psychological comfort blankets, reassuring citizens that the Empire still had some tricks up its toga. Yet, those walls had their limits. Which brings us to the limes, Rome's version of a border wall, only without the modern political infighting. Stretching across Europe, the limes was a series of fortifications and watchtowers that looked great on a map, and even better in propaganda. In reality, it was more a Maginot Line than a great wall, offering sporadic protection and a false sense of security. It's like putting a band-aid on a knife wound and calling it a day. Now, about those legendary legions. The myth of the disciplined Roman soldier, an unstoppable juggernaut of military might, is as seductive as it is misleading. By the 5th century, Rome's legions were more like a patchwork quilt of fighting forces, stretched thinner than a toga in a storm. The legions faced logistical nightmares that would give even the most seasoned supply chain manager a migraine. We're talking about provisioning troops spread across vast distances with roads that were more pothole than pavement. Food, weapons, pay. It all had to be moved across an empire that spanned thousands of miles, and with an economy flatter than a deflated ballista, good luck getting those funds. The legions weren't just battling external threats. They were mired in internal squabbles that made modern office politics look like a playground dispute. Commanders vied for power and prestige, sometimes more interested in political maneuvering than battlefield strategy. Loyalty was a currency more volatile than the Roman denarius, and soldiers often found themselves caught in the crossfire of ambition. But let's not forget the mercenaries. Oh, the mercenaries. Rome's reliance on hired muscle was a double-edged sword, and not the elegant kind wielded by a Roman centurion. As the empire's coffers dried up, the legions turned to these hired hands more than a stressed-out parent turns to caffeine. Many of these mercenaries were barbarians themselves, warriors from the very tribes that Rome feared. It's like hiring a fox to guard the henhouse because you ran out of roosters. These soldiers for hire brought their own skills and chaos, sometimes switching sides faster than a charioteer in a tight race. And here's the twist that would make any historian smirk. Some of these so-called barbarians fought for Rome not out of loyalty, but for the spoils of war and the promise of land. Alaric himself was once a Roman ally before he decided that sacking Rome sounded like a better career move. Talk about a resume gap. These mercenaries weren't just a ragtag bunch of sword-for-hire types, either. They were skilled fighters who understood the Roman way of war, having fought alongside or against Roman soldiers for years. The empire's military strategies were often as Byzantine as the later empire, layered, complex, and full of backstabbing intrigue. The Romans were brilliant at adapting enemy tactics, but they also faced the brutal reality that their own military machine was rusting from the inside out. Meanwhile, the average Roman was left to wonder who was really protecting them. The line between friend and foe blurred faster than a cheap fresco in the rain. With the empire's defenses in tatters and loyalties as fluid as a Roman aqueduct, survival became more about wit and less about warrior spirit. In this swirling vortex of political chaos, economic collapse, and military mayhem, Roman citizens were left to fend for themselves. They relied on the shreds of strategy that remained, hoping that fortified walls and mercenary promises would hold. But as history loves to remind us, empires don't crumble overnight. It's a slow, painful process, like watching a sandcastle dissolve with each wave. So, as you stand amid the crumbling ruins of Roman glory, remember, it's not just about the soldiers or the strategies. It's about the people living through this whirlwind, trying to make sense of a world where the lines between safety and peril, friend and foe, are as blurred as a politician's promise. And as the empire teetered on the brink, one thing was clear. The story of Rome was far from over, and its citizens were more than just passive observers in history's grand narrative. As the Roman Empire teetered on the edge of oblivion, its citizens were busy rewriting the survival manual. No longer could they rely on the grandeur of Rome or the might of its legions. Instead, they had to look inward, both literally and figuratively. The chaos of urban life, with its promises of protection and prosperity, was crumbling faster than a breadstick at a senator's banquet. So, what's a Roman to do? Pack up the lares and penates, those household guards, and head to the countryside, of course. Now, before you start picturing idyllic Roman villas surrounded by rolling vineyards and olive groves, let's get one thing straight. This shift to rural self-sufficiency wasn't exactly a Tuscan vacation. It was more like a desperate scramble to adapt to a world that had suddenly turned its back on them. With cities no longer the bustling hubs they once were, many Romans had to embrace the grit and grind of rural life. The villa economy became the new normal, a decentralized network of estates where survival meant growing your own food, raising livestock, and generally being as self-sufficient as possible. These villa economies were a far cry from the bustling urban marketplaces. They were more like mini-empires, with the villa owner as the local potentate. Imagine a Roman estate sprawling across the countryside, complete with fields, orchards, and vineyards. It was an economic microcosm, with laborers working the land to produce everything from grain to wine. And if you're thinking this sounds like the origins of feudalism, you'd be right on the money, literally. The villa system laid the groundwork for medieval serfdom, with wealthy landowners wielding power over their dependent tenants. While this all sounds rather lovely in a rustic sort of way, the reality was less romantic and more ruthless. Life on a villa was hard work, with long hours under the sun and little room for error. A bad harvest could mean starvation, and there were no corner markets to run to if you ran out of olive oil or wine. Yet, for those who could navigate the challenges, villa life offered a measure of security that the cities no longer could. It was a world where the currency of survival was agricultural know-how rather than Roman coinage, which, by the way, was still less stable than a wooden ladder in a windstorm. But what about the power dynamics, you ask? With urban centers declining, new structures of authority began to emerge, and not all of them were built on farmland. Enter stage left, the church. As Rome's political power waned, the church stepped into the void, offering a semblance of stability in a world gone mad. It was the original social network, connecting communities across the empire with a shared faith and a common language. The church's rise wasn't just about spiritual salvation, though. It was about real-world influence, with bishops and priests becoming key figures in local governance. They were the ones holding communities together as the old Roman order crumbled. In many cases, churches became the new centers of power, their leaders wielding authority that once belonged to senators and governors. And let's face it, when your alternative is a revolving door of emperors with all the staying power of a snowball in the Sahara, a bit of ecclesiastical stability sounds pretty appealing. But don't get too misty-eyed. This wasn't a golden age of peace and harmony. The church was often embroiled in its own power struggles, with rival factions vying for influence. Theological disputes could turn nastier than a Roman chariot race, and church councils were sometimes more about political maneuvering than spiritual enlightenment. Yet, despite the infighting, the church offered a unifying force in a fractured world, its teachings providing a moral compass for those adrift in the chaos. So there you have it, a society in flux, with Romans ditching the urban hustle for the pastoral grind, while new power structures took root like vines in the fertile soil of Italy. As the empire's old institutions withered, the seeds of medieval Europe were being sown, cultivated by villa owners and church leaders alike. It was a world where survival depended on adaptability, where the lines between the past and the future were as blurred as the frescoes on a crumbling villa wall. Yet, even amid the upheaval, the spirit of Rome endured. Its citizens, those masters of adaptation and resilience, found ways to thrive in this brave new world. As the city of Rome faded from the center stage of history, its legacy lived on in the fields and churches of a changing world. And while the story of Rome as an empire was drawing to a close, the narrative of its people was far from over. So, as we contemplate the ruins of a once great civilization, let's remember this. History isn't just about the rise and fall of empires. It's about the people who lived through those times, who adapted, survived, and paved the way for what came next. But let's not just sit around reminiscing about the good old days of crumbling empires and rustic villas, because we've got some political maneuvering to dive into. Picture this. The Roman Empire is a ship on stormy seas, and the emperors are furiously bailing water with a carlander. Meanwhile, the so-called barbarians are not just banging at the gates, they're being invited in for tea and treaties. That's right. While the empire was busy redefining itself, it was also redefining its relationships with its neighbors, frenemies, and sometimes outright enemies. Let's start with the marriage alliances. Forget about the romantic notion of love conquering all. These unions were about as strategic as a chess game, with the stakes being survival rather than checkmate. Take, for instance, Galla Placidia, a Roman princess who found herself in a Visigothic soap opera. In 414 AD, she married Atholf, the king of the Visigoths. This was less of a love story and more of a political power play. Atholf was Alaric's successor, and by marrying the sister of the Roman emperor Honorius, he hoped to cement a new alliance. It's like the medieval version of a corporate merger, less about romance and more about stock options. And what about those treaties? The Roman Empire was a master of the art of compromise, especially when their backs were against the wall. In 382 AD, a treaty known as the Foedus was signed with the Goths, allowing them to settle within the empire's borders in exchange for military service. This wasn't just a show of goodwill. It was a pragmatic move to shore up Rome's dwindling military ranks. Imagine hiring your neighbor to help guard your house because your security system's gone on the fritz. Sure, it might work, but it also means giving them a key to the front door. These arrangements were as risky as they were strategic. On paper, they bolstered Rome's defenses. In reality, they often created tensions that made a family Thanksgiving dinner look harmonious by comparison. The Goths, for instance, were expected to fight for the empire, but they were also trying to carve out a place for themselves. Their loyalty was as stable as a summer fling, and the Roman officials knew it. Yet, necessity is the mother of invention, or in this case, accommodation. But let's not paint the Romans as hapless victims of circumstance. They knew how to play the game. Roman diplomacy was a fine blend of carrot and stick, with a side of calculated charm. They were experts at making promises they didn't necessarily intend to keep, all in the name of keeping the peace and maintaining the illusion of control. It was diplomacy by sleight of hand, and it worked, until it didn't. One of the most famous examples of Roman cunning was the handling of the Huns. Attila, the infamous scourge of God, was pacified multiple times with hefty payments and promises. The Romans sent ambassadors who were more silver-tongued than a snake oil salesman, armed with gold, flattery, and a keen understanding of Hun politics. This was less about diplomacy and more about paying protection money to the neighborhood bully. Expensive and humiliating, but sometimes the only option. Yet, these interactions weren't just about survival. They were about redefining what it meant to be Roman. As the empire mingled with these so-called barbarians, cultural lines began to blur. Roman customs, language, and laws mixed with those of the Goths, Franks, and others. It was a melting pot of traditions, creating a cultural stew that would eventually flavor much of medieval Europe. And here's the kicker. These interactions forced Romans to question their identity. Was being Roman about living within the empire's borders, speaking Latin, or adhering to Roman law? Or was it something more fluid, adaptable to the changing times? The answers were as varied as the people who lived through these tumultuous centuries. While the empire was playing diplomatic chess, Individual Romans were coming to terms with a world where yesterday's enemies could be today's allies. For some, this was an existential crisis. For others, it was an opportunity. The ability to adapt became the new Roman virtue, replacing the old ideals of rigid discipline and unyielding strength. Some Romans even saw the barbarians as a breath of fresh air, bringing new energy and ideas. But let's not get too carried away with the Cumbia narrative. The reality was often a messy, uncomfortable blend of cooperation and conflict. The Roman Empire was a living, breathing entity, constantly evolving and redefining itself in response to external pressures and internal weaknesses. In the end, the political maneuvers and alliances of this era were a testament to Rome's resilience and its willingness to redefine itself in the face of adversity. These were not just survival tactics, they were acts of transformation. The Roman Empire may have been crumbling, but its legacy was being reforged in the fires of necessity and innovation. As we leave this part of history, remember that the Romans were more than just their marble monuments and grandiose histories. They were people, navigating a world that was changing faster than they could rebuild their temples. Their story is one of adaptation, a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and thrive, even as the world shifts beneath their feet. So stay tuned, because the tale of Rome's transformation is far from over, and there's plenty more intrigue, betrayal, and unexpected alliances to uncover. The Roman Empire was like a legendary rock band in its twilight years, juggling nostalgia tours while trying to stay relevant in a rapidly changing world. And just like any band worth its salt, Rome had its die-hard fans and its critics, each with their own version of the story. As we wrap up this epic saga, let's sift through the debris of marble and myth to see what survived the fall and how it molded the Europe we know today. Let's start with the transformation of Roman identity. You see, Rome wasn't just a place or a collection of ruins. It was an idea that had to pivot like a startup at a pitch meeting when the barbarians began to crash the party. The fall of Rome didn't happen overnight, nor was it a singular event. It was a slow metamorphosis, the kind you need a time-lapse camera to appreciate. By the time the Western Empire officially fell in 476 AD, with a whimper rather than a bang, the Roman identity had already begun its transformation from grand empire to a series of regional powers, each claiming a slice of the Roman pie. Now, let's debunk a myth that's tougher to kill than a hydra. The notion that the barbarians were, well, barbaric. Spoiler alert. They were more than just helmeted marauders with an appetite for destruction. These groups, be they Goths, Vandals, or Huns, brought with them new blood, new customs, and yes, new conflicts. But they also injected a dynamism that shook the old Roman order like a seismic jolt. As they settled, they didn't just sack cities. They established kingdoms that laid the groundwork for modern Europe. The Visigoths in Spain, the Ostrogoths in Italy, the Franks in Gaul, they were the remix artists of history, taking Roman influences and creating something entirely new. Economically, the fall of the Western Roman Empire did not spell doom and gloom as some might think. Sure, the centralized economy collapsed, and with it, the grand trade networks. But out of these ashes rose localized economies, much like phoenixes with a penchant for barter systems and agriculture. The villa economy we talked about, it was the precursor to the feudal system, where land became the new currency. Those self-sufficient estates weren't just a retreat from chaos. They were incubators for a new socio-economic order. And while the standard of living took a dip for many, let's not romanticize the past too much. The average Roman probably didn't wake up to a breakfast of ambrosia and nectar, even at the height of the empire. Politically, the empire's demise was like a game of musical thrones, with the central power gone. Regional leaders, some of them descended from those notorious barbarians, claimed their stakes. They were like mini-emperors, wielding authority that was as much about charisma and cunning as it was about inherited power. And while the political landscape was as fragmented as a shattered mosaic, it was also fertile ground for the rise of nation-states. Think of it as the chaotic prelude to the European concert we know today. The Church, too, played a pivotal role in this transformation. As the Roman political structure crumbled, the Church stepped into the vacuum, becoming both a spiritual and temporal authority. It spread its influence like ivy creeping over a crumbling wall, offering stability and continuity. The bishops and popes, with their fingers in both pies of faith and politics, became power brokers in their own right. They were like the ancient world's equivalent of a multi-billion-dollar corporation with a divine mandate. And let's not forget their role as cultural custodians, preserving Roman knowledge and tradition even as the empire itself faded into history. So, what can we modern folks learn from this epic tale of resilience and reinvention? First, adaptability is key. The Romans and their successors didn't just survive by clinging to the past. They thrived by embracing change. In an age of technological disruption and global challenges, that's a lesson worth bookmarking. Second, history is less about the rise and fall of empires, and more about the people who lived through those times. Their struggles, their triumphs, and their failures are the threads that weave the human narrative. And finally, let's not forget that history is never a straight line. It's a tangled web of stories, each with its own twists and turns, heroes and villains. Fall of the Roman Empire wasn't the end. It was a transformation, a rebirth that set the stage for the rich tapestry of medieval and modern Europe. It's a reminder that while civilizations may rise and fall, the human spirit endures, finding ways to adapt, survive, and eventually flourish. So as you mull over the legacy of Rome, remember that history's greatest tales are often those of reinvention. The barbarians at the gates turned out to be the architects of a new world, their invasions paving the way for a Europe that would ultimately embrace both its Roman past and its diverse future. And that, dear listeners, is a story worth telling over and over again, each time with a slightly different tune, but always with the same enduring beat. Ancient Egypt's social pyramid was less of a pyramid scheme and more of a divine hierarchy, with the pharaoh sitting at the apex like an ancient celebrity whose profile picture was, quite literally, carved in stone. This guy wasn't just any ruler. He was a walking, talking deity with a crown. His status as a god king wasn't just marketing fluff. It was the ultimate branding exercise, where power met the supernatural in a way that even modern PR agencies might envy. If hashtag campaigns existed back then, #divine ruler would have been trending for centuries. The pharaoh's image was crafted with meticulous care. It was a blend of celestial and terrestrial power, with a dash of the mystical. His headdress, the nemes, was more than a fashion statement. It was a symbol that shouted, "I'm the boss of both this world and the next." And those colossal statues and towering pyramids, not just architectural wonders, but ancient billboards proclaiming his might. If you think modern skyscrapers are impressive, remember that the Great Pyramid of Giza was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 800 years. Eat your heart out, Burj Khalifa. But let's not get too carried away with the romantic notion of the pharaoh as a benevolent god king. The reality was a touch more Machiavellian. Those who dared to question the divine status of the pharaoh risked finding themselves on the wrong side of a crocodile-infested Nile. The pharaoh's power was absolute, his wealth staggering. He controlled the land, the people, and yes, even the afterlife. His treasury was filled with gold, silver, and precious stones. Think of it as Fort Knox, but with a slightly more exotic touch. Now, the pharaoh didn't just wake up one morning and declare himself a god. Oh no, this was the result of some serious theological maneuvering. The ancient Egyptians believed in Ma'at, the cosmic order of the universe, and the pharaoh was its earthly embodiment. If Ma'at was upset, you ended up with chaos, and nobody wanted that. The pharaoh's job was to keep the universe's balance in check, a responsibility that came with perks like limitless power and wealth, but also the occasional assassination attempt. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it right. The divine marketing campaign was a multi-generational effort. Each pharaoh claimed direct lineage from the gods, a lineage they were not shy about flaunting. The god Horus was often associated with the living pharaoh, while Osiris was tied to the pharaoh in death. This created a nifty little loop of divine succession that ensured the ruling family's grip on power. It was like having your family tree endorsed by Mount Olympus itself, only with more hieroglyphs and fewer lightning bolts. Let's not forget the propaganda machine that was ancient Egyptian art. Artists worked tirelessly to ensure the pharaoh's image was always portrayed in the most flattering light. You'd never see a pharaoh with a bad hair day or a crooked nose on any temple wall. This wasn't just vanity. It was a tool to reinforce his divine image and omnipotence. In a world where illiteracy was rampant, Images were everything, and the pharaoh's visage was the ancient equivalent of $1 million logo. But for all the grandeur and god-like posturing, the reality of Pharaoh's rule was grounded in very earthly concerns. The economy was based on agriculture, reliant on the annual flooding of the Nile. Managing this resource required a bureaucracy as complex as any modern government. The pharaoh was at the top, commanding a vast network of officials who ensured his edicts were followed and taxes collected, no small feat in an empire that stretched over 386,000 square miles. The pharaoh's power wasn't just about wealth and divine status. It was political acumen. He was a master diplomat, negotiating alliances and treaties, sometimes with a bit of subterfuge. After all, what's a little espionage among friends? His court was a hive of political maneuvering, with advisors and courtiers vying for influence. It makes today's political dramas look like playground squabbles. In essence, the pharaoh was less a ruler and more a brand, a god-infused symbol of power and unity. His image was carefully curated, his status meticulously maintained by a network of scribes, priests, and artisans who ensured the divine narrative stayed on course. And while we can chuckle at the grandiosity of it all, it's hard not to admire the sheer scale and audacity of the ancient Egyptian PR machine. It created a legacy that still captivates us today, a testament to the enduring power of storytelling, divine or otherwise. But enough about the pharaoh's divine PR juggernaut. Let's shuffle down the golden corridors of power to meet the real MVPs of ancient Egypt's ruling system, the viziers and nobles. Picture them as the ultimate backstage crew, the ones who made sure the pharaoh's reign didn't turn into a chaotic open mic night at the local amphitheater. These were the people who had the unenviable task of translating the pharaoh's godlike whims into practical policies and day-to-day governance. It's a bit like being the roadies for a rock star who thinks he's descended from Zeus. Start with the vizier, the pharaoh's right-hand human, and arguably the most powerful person in Egypt after the big guy himself. The vizier was like the ancient Egyptian version of a Swiss Army knife, except instead of tiny scissors, you had a toolkit of administrative power. This role was all about ensuring the smooth operation of the state machinery, keeping the complex bureaucracy ticking like a well-oiled chariot wheel. The vizier oversaw everything from tax collection to the irrigation system that kept the Nile's gift of fertile soil flowing through the kingdom like clockwork. If the pharaoh was the face of the operation, the vizier was the brain, the gears, and sometimes even the emergency brakes. The vizier's responsibilities didn't end with agriculture and taxes, though. He was also the supreme judge, a sort of ancient Judge Judy, but with a lot more eyeliner and a much heavier workload. Imagine the docket, land disputes, trade disagreements, and the occasional theft of a sacred ibis feather. It was a crucial judicial role that required both wisdom and a keen sense of justice, ensuring that the universal order, was upheld. One misstep, though, and it could be your head on the chopping block, or worse, you might find yourself demoted to a less glamorous job, like royal latrine inspector. Now, let's not ignore the nobles, the elite class who orbited the pharaoh like well-dressed satellites. These folks had titles as long as the Nile and responsibilities that could be just as winding. They were the governors of regions, the overseers of temples, and the commanders of armies. Imagine them as the regional managers in the vast corporate entity that was ancient Egypt, each with their own territories and specific portfolios. Of course, with great power came great responsibility and the risk of spectacular failure. Climbing to the top might get you a villa with a view of the pyramids, but a misstep could land you in the dung pit of history. And let's talk perks. Being close to the pharaoh came with benefits that would make a modern CEO jealous. Access to luxury goods like fine linens, imported oils, and enough gold bling to make king meters blush. But it wasn't all ancient champagne and caviar. Proximity to power also meant you were always one political faux pas away from a very public fall from grace. The pharaoh's court was no stranger to intrigue and power plays, where alliances could shift as quickly as the sands of the desert. Navigating this social minefield required a deft touch, a silver tongue, and sometimes a well-timed bribe. It's important to remember that while the nobles lived in opulence, they were crucial cogs in Egypt's administrative machine. They ensured that the regions were managed effectively, that the temples were funded and maintained, and that the armies were ready to defend against any invaders who fancied a slice of the Nile's bounty. This was no small feat, considering Egypt's borders stretched across an expanse roughly the size of Texas. Coordinating such a vast territory required skillful diplomacy and an eye for detail, qualities that were just as essential to maintaining their own positions of power. Of course, being a noble didn't mean you were immune to the occasional royal temper tantrum. If the pharaoh decided he didn't like the cut of your jib, your career could end faster than you could say, Tutankhamun. It was a world where loyalty was everything, but loyalty could be as fickle as the annual Nile flood. The ability to read the political tides was critical for survival in a court where one day you could be a trusted advisor, and the next you could be exiled to the desert with nothing but a pot of figs and a stern warning. And let's not forget the role of women in this upper echelon. While it's true that ancient Egyptian society was predominantly patriarchal, women in these high circles wielded significant influence. Queens and noblewomen often held sway in political and religious affairs. They managed estates, influenced decisions, and occasionally stepped into the shoes of the pharaoh himself when the need arose, as in the case of Hatshepsut, who donned the false beard of kingship like a boss. In a world where your status could change as quickly as the latest hieroglyphic style, navigating the upper echelons of Egyptian society was a high-stakes game. The viziers and nobles were more than mere functionaries. They were the architects of the empire's stability, the behind-the-scenes powerhouses who ensured that the pharaoh could continue his divine reign without interruption. They were quite literally glue that held the kingdom together, ensuring that the grand narrative of the pharaoh's divine rule was not just a story carved in stone, but a living, breathing reality. So next time you admire the pyramids or the artwork of ancient Egypt, spare a thought for these unsung heroes whose efforts helped create a civilization that continues to fascinate us millennia later. So, as we peel away the layers of Pharaoh's glittering entourage, let's dive into the world of scribes, priests, and artisans, the unsung heroes, or perhaps the unsung workaholics, of ancient Egypt. These were the folks who kept the administrative machinery humming along like a well-tuned chariot, and who added a splash of color, often literally, to Egypt's grand tapestry. First up, the scribes. Now, if you think being a scribe was just about jotting down Pharaoh's grocery list or counting grain, think again. These guys were the data analysts of their day, ensuring that the kingdom's bureaucratic beast was properly fed. Becoming a scribe wasn't as simple as picking up a pen, or rather, a reed. It was more like attending the ancient equivalent of Harvard, minus the student loans, but plus a rigorous curriculum that involved mastering some 700 hieroglyphs. Talk about a challenging alphabet soup. Scribes were indispensable, handling everything from tax records to legal documents. They wielded the power of the written word in a society where literacy was as rare as a snowstorm in the Sahara. Oh, and forget about casual Fridays. Scribes needed to be on their A-game. One slip of the pen, and you might accidentally grant a tax exemption to a dozen crocodiles. These scribes were the unsung heroes behind Egypt's complex bureaucracy, and they enjoyed a cushy status because of it. They might not have had the bling of the nobles, but their ability to read and write made them indispensable, and they often found themselves in positions of considerable influence. Now, let's turn our gaze to the priests, the spiritual heavyweights of ancient Egypt. Picture this. A society where the gods were as much a part of daily life as the sun and the Nile. The priests were the intermediaries, the go-betweens in this divine dialogue, and boy, did they take their roles seriously. Imagine having to wake up at dawn to perform ceremonies that would ensure the sun god Ra was in a good mood, kind of like the ultimate customer service job, except your client was the universe. Priests were more than just religious functionaries. They were power players, managing temple estates that were like mini-kingdoms, complete with lands, workers, and livestock. These temples weren't just spiritual hubs, they were economic powerhouses. The largest, like Karnak Temple, were sprawling complexes that could rival a small city. The priests wielded significant power, not only in religious matters, but also in the economic and political arenas. They were the original influencers, shaping public opinion and maintaining the delicate balance between the earthly and the divine. In theory, priests were supposed to live ascetic lives, but in reality, They enjoyed a lifestyle that was far from monastic. Their temples were often flush with wealth, and the offerings made by the faithful ensured that the priestly class lived comfortably. It was a delicate balance of power, though. While they had the ear of the guards, they also had to keep one eye on the pharaoh, whose approval was necessary for their continued prosperity. The priests were master diplomats, navigating the complex interplay of religion and politics with skill and aplomb. And finally, let's talk about the artisans, the creative geniuses behind Egypt's iconic art and architecture. These were the folks who turned slabs of stone into timeless monuments and blank walls into vibrant frescoes. While the pharaohs and nobles got the glory, it was the artisans who brought their grand visions to life. Being an artisan required talent, skill, and a fair amount of patience, especially when your canvas was a 10-ton slab of granite. Artisans worked in teams, each with specialized roles. Stone carvers, painters, jewelers, they all played a part in creating the visual splendor of ancient Egypt. These craftsmen were often organized into workshops, with the most famous being at Deir el-Medina, a village established to house the workers building the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. It was an artist's commune of sorts, where creativity thrived and camaraderie flourished. Just don't mention the occasional labor strike when wages were late. While artisans didn't enjoy the wealth or status of the scribes or priests, they held a respected place in society. Their work was a bridge between the mortal and the divine, capturing the essence of Egyptian beliefs and ensuring they endured for millennia. If you've ever admired the intricate designs of a sarcophagus or the lifelike beauty of a statue, you've got an ancient artisan to thank. They might not have signed their work, but their legacy is as enduring as the pyramids. In a society where your next life was as important as your current one, artisans also played a crucial role in the afterlife. The craftsmanship of a tomb or the artistry of a burial mask was believed to have a direct impact on a person's journey in the hereafter. So, no pressure or anything, but a slip of the chisel could result in some very awkward conversations with Osiris. These professional classes were the backbone of ancient Egypt, each contributing to the stability and prosperity of the civilization in their unique way. While they might not have had the fame of the pharaoh or the riches of the nobles, their contributions were essential to maintaining the cosmic order and ensuring the continued success of one of history's most remarkable civilizations. So, next time you marvel at the wonders of ancient Egypt, spare a thought for these unsung heroes who made it all possible, one hieroglyph, prayer, and sculpture at a time. Now, let's descend from the lofty heights of pharaohs and their entourage to the gritty reality of the common folk, the farmers, laborers, and slaves who formed the bedrock of ancient Egyptian society. If the elites were the face of Egypt, these folks were the muscles, sinews, and occasionally the aching backs that kept the whole show on the road. First, picture the farmers, the unsung heroes who were at the mercy of the Nile's whims. These were the folks who toiled in the fields as the sun beat down with all the subtlety of a runaway chariot. Their life was a cycle as predictable as the river's floods, planting, harvesting, and praying that the gods were in a good mood this year. It's a bit like gambling, but instead of losing your shirt, you lose your entire livelihood. The farmers depended on the annual inundation of the Nile, which left a rich deposit of silt perfect for crops like wheat and barley. This wasn't just any dirt. It was the lifeblood of Egyptian agriculture, turning arid land into a breadbasket. The farmers' tools were simple, think wooden plows, sickles, and hoes, but effective. And when the harvest came, so did the tax collectors, ready to swoop in like vultures on a carcass. Taxes were paid in grain, and you better believe that Pharaoh's coffers were as hungry as a hippo at an all-you-can-eat buffet. Now, let's debunk a little myth about pyramid building, shall we? Contrary to popular belief, those monumental structures weren't constructed by armies of whipped slaves. Nope, they were built by a workforce of skilled laborers and seasonal workers who were, wait for it, actually paid for their efforts. The workers' village discovered at Giza shows they were housed, fed, and even given beer as part of their compensation. It's like a company cafeteria, but with more sand and a lot less air conditioning. These workers were organized into crews with names like Friends of Khufu, making them sound like ancient fan clubs. They worked in shifts, and despite the back-breaking labor, the conditions were surprisingly well managed. It's hard to romanticize the brutal reality of hauling massive stone blocks, but the workers weren't just faceless drones. They were craftsmen who took pride in their work. The pyramids weren't just tombs. They were a testament to human engineering and the tenacity of a workforce who, quite literally, moved mountains. But let's not sugarcoat it. Life at the bottom wasn't all hieroglyphs and beer. The laborers and farmers were vulnerable to the whims of nature and the demands of those above them on the social ladder. When the Nile didn't flood as expected, famine loomed like a specter. And in a society where social mobility was as rare as a rainstorm, climbing the ranks was about as likely as a camel winning a beauty contest in a cattle fair. Now, onto slavery, a topic often shrouded in misconceptions. While it's true that slavery existed in ancient Egypt, it wasn't the same as the chattel slavery we associate with later periods. Many slaves were captives taken in war or people unable to pay their debts. They could own property, marry, and even buy their freedom. However, let's not romanticize their plight. Slavery, regardless of its form, was a harsh reality, a reminder of the brutal hierarchies that existed. Slaves worked in households, workshops, or on state projects, and while they weren't shackled at every moment, their lives were dictated by the will of their masters. The lucky ones might have served in a noble's household, gaining some measure of comfort and stability. Others weren't so fortunate, enduring grueling work in quarries or mines. It's a stark reminder that for every glittering monument to divine kingship, there was a human cost paid in sweat and toil. As we peel back the layers of Egypt's social structure, it's clear that the common folk were the unsung engines of ancient civilization. They didn't have the luxury of divine lineage or the comfort of wealth, but their contributions were as vital as the floodwaters of the Nile. Life wasn't easy, but it was theirs, and they navigated it with a resilience that's both sobering and inspiring. In the grand tapestry of ancient Egypt, these everyday heroes are like the weft threads, unseen but crucial to the whole design. They remind us that history isn't just the story of the powerful. It's the story of those who made the impossible possible, one grain, one stone, and one day at a time. As we continue our journey through this fascinating civilization, let's keep our eyes on both the grandeur and the grit, because in the end, it's the interplay between the two that tells the true tale of ancient Egypt. So, as we wrap up our tour through the sands of time, it's tempting to think that ancient Egypt's social structure is as alien as a hieroglyphic moon landing. But here's the kicker. In many ways, we're not so different from those pyramid builders and their divine overlords. The Egyptians had their own version of LinkedIn, with connections that could make or break you, and a hierarchy that was as rigid as a pharaoh's headdress. Humans, it seems, have always had an affinity for social order, whether it's in a desert kingdom or a modern metropolis. Take the divine right of kings, for example. Back then, the pharaoh's power came from the gods themselves, a celestial endorsement that had everyone from scribes to farmers nodding along. Fast forward a few millennia, and while we might not be bowing to sun gods, we still venerate leaders in suits, often treating their words like gospel. The packaging has changed, but the allure of a charismatic leader remains a constant. It's the same old song, just with a new tune and a digital chorus. Let's talk economics, because if you scratch beneath the gold leaf of ancient Egypt, you'll find the robust machinery of an economy that was as sophisticated as it was essential. The Nile was their lifeline, much like modern supply chains that keep our shelves stocked. Back then, it was all about grain, taxes, and trade routes that stretched across the ancient world. Today, it's GDP, stock markets, and international trade agreements. The stakes might be higher now, but the game is eerily familiar. Just like the ancient Egyptians, we rely on a delicate balance of resources, labor, and logistics to keep the wheels of society spinning. And then there's social mobility, or the lack thereof. In Egypt, if you were born a farmer, odds were you die a farmer, unless you had the charisma of Cleopatra. Modern societies like to think we've cracked the code on social mobility, but the truth is, the ladder is often missing a few rungs. Whether it's due to economic inequality, educational access, or just plain old nepotism, the struggle to climb from one social tier to another is a tale as old as time. It's a reminder that while we might have traded papyrus for pixels, the script hasn't changed all that much. Of course, we can't ignore the role of myth and storytelling, which were as vital to the ancient Egyptians as they are to us today. The Pharaohs understood the power of a good narrative, be it the tale of Osiris or the legend of Horus. These stories weren't just bedtime tales. They were the framework that held society together, offering explanations for the unexplainable and comfort in times of chaos. Today, we binge-watch series and devour novels, still searching for meaning, identity, and a sense of belonging. The mediums have evolved, but the human yearning for stories remains unquenched. Now, let's not forget technology, or rather, the lack thereof. The ancient Egyptians built wonders with little more than ingenuity, manpower, and a few rudimentary tools. Fast forward to today, and we have AI, robotics, and the internet at our disposal, yet we still struggle with the same basic issues: resource scarcity, environmental challenges, and a penchant for building things that are more about showing off than serving a purpose. While we've come a long way from stone chisels and ramps, the drive to leave our mark on history is a theme that connects us across the ages. In pondering why ancient Egypt still captivates us, it's not just the monuments or the mummies. It's the mirror it holds up to our own world. The Egyptians' achievements and struggles remind us that history is a continuous thread, weaving together the aspirations, failures, and triumphs of humanity. Their civilization, like ours, was a complex tapestry of power and politics, of gods and mortals, of dreams and realities. Ultimately, ancient Egypt teaches us that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Their society was a grand stage, and much like today, everyone had their role to play, from the pharaoh to the farmer, from the scribe to the slave. The players might have changed, but the script remains familiar. In understanding their world, we gain insight into our own, reminding us that while time marches on, the human story is as timeless as the pyramids themselves. So, the next time you find yourself caught in the grind of modern life, spare a thought for those ancient Egyptians who walked a similar path under the shadow of the Great Pyramid. They remind us that history isn't just about the past. It's a dialogue with the present, a conversation that continues to unfold with each new generation. And as we look to the future, let's carry with us the lessons of those who came before, ensuring that the stories we write today will inspire those who come after, just as the tales of ancient Egypt inspire us now. Harriet Beecher Stowe's story begins with a quiver in the pews of Litchfield, Connecticut, where her father, Lyman Beecher, was busy scaring the hell out of his congregation, literally. Picture a man so intense, his sermons were likely the 19th century equivalent of a blockbuster horror flick, but with less popcorn and more fire and brimstone. Lyman Beecher wasn't just any preacher. He was the sort who could make you feel guilty for sins you hadn't even considered yet. Harriet, born in 1811 as the seventh of 13 children. Yes, 13, because apparently the Beecher family was in the business of forming their own congregation. Grew up in an environment steeped in rigorous moral fervor and intellectual stimulation. Now, let's talk about Cincinnati, where Harriet would eventually find herself. In the 1830, Cincinnati was the wild, wild west of America's burgeoning frontier, minus the tumbleweeds. It was a booming hub, bustling with trade, innovation, and a stew of cultural influences. Think 19th century New York, but with fewer skyscrapers and more steamboats. It was here, in this city of growth and grit, that Harriet would confront the realities of a divided nation. But before we get to that juicy part, let's take a detour into the economic landscape of the time. The early 1800s in America was a period where cotton was king, and slavery was the dark crown jewel that made it so. The economy of the southern states was deeply intertwined with the peculiar institution. And while the North was more of a manufacturing powerhouse, it wasn't exactly guilt-free from the profits slavery generated. This was the backdrop against which Harriet Beecher Stowe would become, well, Harriet Beecher Stowe. By 1836, Harriet had moved to Cincinnati, which was not just a geographical shift, but a seismic life change. She married Calvin Stowe, a professor at Lane Theological Seminary, where her father also preached the gospel of reform. Cincinnati was a border city, a stone's throw away from Kentucky, where slavery wasn't just a word in a textbook, but a grim reality. Harriet could practically see the smoke from Kentucky's chimneys from her window, possibly while contemplating how to stretch a meager budget to feed a growing family. Financial stress was no stranger to Harriet, who juggled riding with family duties, because apparently The 19th century feminist slogan was "Have it all, do it all, with half the sleep." It was in this vibrant, chaotic city that Harriet's eyes were opened to the brutal reality of slavery. She witnessed it firsthand, a stark contrast to the somewhat sanitized discussions she'd heard growing up in the North. She even housed fugitive slaves in her home as part of the Underground Railroad, which was as risky as it was noble. If there was a Yelp review for bravery in the 1800s, Harriet's would be 5 stars. But Harriet wasn't just a woman of action. She was a woman of words. Her early writing career was less about fame and more about keeping the pantry stocked. She wrote articles and stories for a variety of publications, not because she fancied herself the next Shakespeare, but because, well, writing paid the bills. Her early works, like The Mayflower, were published in 1843 and were more genteel musings on New England life before she became the literary heavyweight she's remembered as today. One can only imagine the pressure of balancing a quiverful of children, a precarious financial situation, and the call of a moral crusade that could change the world. It was the kind of pressure that could either crush you or forge you into a visionary. Fortunately for history, Harriet fell into the latter category. She was about to embark on a journey that would transform her into a central figure in the abolitionist movement, but not before overcoming the hurdles of her everyday life. Hurdles that would make most of us want to crawl back into bed and pull the covers over our heads. So there she was, Harriet Beecher Stowe, living in a city of contradictions. Cincinnati was a place where the ideals of freedom and the harsh realities of slavery collided daily. For Harriet, it was impossible to ignore these contradictions, and even more impossible not to write about them. A pen would become her sword, and her words would carve out a place in history that would echo far beyond the banks of the Ohio River. But for now, she was simply a woman at the crossroads of moral duty and personal survival, with a sharp mind and an even sharper quill. And so, in the midst of Cincinnati's swirling contradictions, Harriet Beecher Stowe picked up her pen and unleashed a literary storm that would sweep across America and beyond. Enter Uncle Tom's Cabin, a novel that wasn't just a book, but a cultural phenomenon. Published in 1852, it was the 19th century equivalent of going viral, minus the hashtags and Twitter threads. We're talking 300,000 copies sold in the first year alone. To put that in perspective, that's like selling out a Taylor Swift concert in seconds. If Taylor Swift had been an abolitionist writer with a penchant for moral storytelling, the novel was serialized in the National Era, an abolitionist periodical, before getting published as a 2-volume book. Here's a fun tidbit. The serialization started in 1851, and by the time the last installment hit the stands, people were practically rioting for the book version. It was as if Harriet had written the Game of Thrones of her day, except her dragons were the fiery debates about slavery and freedom. Now, let's talk about those characters because, oh boy, did they stir the pot. Uncle Tom, the noble, long-suffering protagonist, became a lightning rod for both praise and criticism. Some saw him as a Christ-like figure, a martyr for his people, while others criticized the character for perpetuating stereotypes and passivity. And then there was the villainous Simon Legree, a character so vile, you half expected him to twirl a mustache and cackle maniacally. But Stowe's true stroke of genius was in her ability to humanize the enslaved, presenting them as complex, relatable individuals rather than mere property. The impact of Uncle Tom's Cabin on the abolitionist movement was seismic. It put a human face on the horrors of slavery, turning abstract moral debates into visceral emotional experiences. It was like Harriet handed America a mirror and said, "Take a good, hard look at yourself." And look they did, some with newfound empathy, others with defensive outrage. Abraham Lincoln reportedly referred to Stowe as the little lady who started this great war, a testament to the book's influence, though it's likely apocryphal. Lincoln wasn't exactly known for his pithy one-liners, but with fame came controversy. Critics took aim at Stowe's portrayal of African Americans, arguing she oversimplified or sentimentalized their struggles. It's a fair critique, one that continues to spark debate among historians and readers alike. Yet, for all its flaws, the novel succeeded in galvanizing anti-slavery sentiment, proving that literature could be as potent as any political speech or protest. As for Harriet herself, navigating her newfound fame was a comedy of errors. For starters, many assumed H.B. Stowe was a man. After all, serious writing was still largely a male-dominated field. Imagine the surprise when the public discovered the author was not a mustachioed gentleman, but a middle-aged mother of 7. It's said that during one of her tours in England, she was introduced to a group of admirers who were visibly shocked to find her in a dress rather than a waistcoat and top hat. Stowe's fame was both a blessing and a burden. On one hand, it afforded her a platform to speak out against slavery with even greater authority. On the other, it thrust her into the spotlight, a place not every writer craves. But Harriet handled it with a mix of grace and humor, often poking fun at the absurdity of her situation. After all, this was a woman who had once juggled riding with mending socks and keeping children from eating paste. Let's not forget the economic backdrop here. The success of Uncle Tom's Cabin wasn't just a cultural milestone. It was a financial windfall for Stowe. In an era when women were barely allowed to own property, she made enough to buy a house in Maine and support her family comfortably. Yet the broader economic context was anything but rosy. The South's dependence on slave labor was a ticking time bomb, and the novel only hastened its countdown. So, there you have it, a novel that was more than just ink on paper. It was a clarion call for change, wrapped in a compelling narrative that both inspired and infuriated. Harriet Beecher Stowe didn't just write a book. She sparked a movement, proving that words could indeed change the world. And while the debates it ignited still smolder to this day, one thing is clear. Uncle Tom's Cabin was the match that lit the fire. With the ink still drying on her literary triumph, Stowe would continue to navigate the choppy waters of fame and controversy. But that's a tale for another time, as Harriet's story and the impact of her work continue to ripple through history. Stay tuned, because this narrative is far from over. With the ink still drying on her literary triumph, Harriet Beecher Stowe found herself in the eye of a cultural hurricane. Uncle Tom's Cabin wasn't just a book. It was the 19th century equivalent of a social media firestorm. Opinions were flying like arrows at a medieval fair, and everyone had something to say. Some hailed Stowe as a visionary, while others accused her of inflaming tensions. But let's step into this swirling storm of backlash and support, both at home and across the pond, and see what really went down. First, let's talk about the domestic scene. If Uncle Tom's Cabin had been a movie, it would have been the blockbuster that critics love to hate, but audiences can't get enough of. In the North, the book was a rallying cry for abolitionists who saw Stowe as a hero, wielding her pen like a sword. Yet in the South, it was denounced as a work of inflammatory lies. Southern critics claimed the book was as fictional as a unicorn eating cotton candy, arguing that Stowe had never set foot on a Southern plantation. They accused her of misrepresenting the benevolent institution of slavery, a bit like calling a shark a misunderstood sea puppy. The backlash was fierce and immediate. Southern newspapers ran scathing reviews, and some even published rebuttals in the form of pro-slavery novels, like Aunt Philly's Cabin and The Planter's Northern Bride. These literary counterattacks were the 1850s version of a Twitter feud, though with more ink and fewer hashtags. Yet, despite the venomous critiques, Stowe's novel continued to fly off the shelves. It was proof that controversy sells, a lesson as old as time but as relevant as ever. But hold your horses, because the story doesn't end at the Mason-Dixon line. Across the Atlantic, Uncle Tom's Cabin was making waves as well. In Britain, the book found a sympathetic audience among those who had already abolished slavery within their colonies. By 1852, the novel had sold over 1.5 million copies in Britain alone. It was like the Beatles' British invasion, except Harriet Beecher Stowe was the lead singer, and her guitar was a typewriter. European readers were captivated by the vivid portrayal of American slavery, and the novel sparked debates in parliaments and drawing rooms alike. Queen Victoria herself was rumored to have read the book, though whether she clutched her pearls in horror or nodded sagely is anyone's guess. The international acclaim further amplified the pressure on America to address its peculiar institution, turning Stowe into an unlikely ambassador for abolition. Now, let's tackle that famous quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln, where he supposedly greeted Stowe with, "So you're the little lady who started this great war." It's a line that has all the elements of a great myth, humor, irony, and a touch of hyperbole. But here's the kicker: it probably never happened. Lincoln was famous for his wit, but there's no solid evidence he ever uttered those words. Still, the quote persists, a testament to Stowe's undeniable impact on American history. It's like the historical equivalent of an urban legend, plausible, memorable, but not quite true. So why does this myth endure? Perhaps because it encapsulates the power of Stowe's work to provoke seismic shifts in public consciousness. Uncle Tom's Cabin didn't single-handedly start the Civil War, but it certainly fanned the flames. The novel forced Americans to confront the moral contradictions of slavery, much like a persistent itch you can't ignore. It served as a catalyst, intensifying the sectional conflicts that had been simmering for decades. The South's dependence on slavery was not just an economic choice, it was an existential one. The book made this clear, and in doing so, it challenged the very foundations of Southern society. The economic realities of the time were as much a part of this story as the moral ones. The North's industrial economy was booming, largely independent of slave labor, while the South's agrarian world seemed caught in a time loop, clinging to a system that the rest of the world had moved past. Uncle Tom's Cabin was less a gentle nudge towards change and more a shove off a cliff, forcing Americans to reckon with the fact that the nation was on a collision course with itself. As the sectional tensions rose, so did the stakes for Stowe. She received letters from readers across the spectrum. Some were heartfelt thanks, others not so subtle threats. She was even sent a package containing a slave's ear, a gruesome reminder of the stakes involved. Yet, Stowe remained undeterred. Her resolve only strengthened as she continued to write, speak, and advocate for the abolitionist cause. Her work was far from done, and neither was the fight she'd helped to ignite. As the nation inched closer to civil war, the echoes of Uncle Tom's Cabin reverberated through the halls of Congress and the fields of battle. Stowe's novel had transformed from a mere book into a symbol of a nation's conscience, a call to action that refused to fade quietly into the night. In the years leading up to the Civil War, the tensions boiled over, and Stowe's work became both a flashpoint and a rallying cry. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's still much more to uncover about Harriet's journey and the legacy of her incendiary novel. So, hold on to your quills, because the story of Harriet Beecher Stowe and Uncle Tom's Cabin is far from over. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the tumultuous events that followed and the indelible mark left by this remarkable woman and her equally remarkable book. And so, as the Civil War loomed ever closer, Harriet Beecher Stowe wasn't about to rest on her laurels or her royalties. No, this was a woman who saw a tidal wave of change coming and decided to keep sailing right into it. Fresh off the success of Uncle Tom's Cabin, she rolled up her sleeves and dug into more writing, activism, and let's face it, a bit of myth management. First up, the sequel that wasn't really a sequel, A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, published in 1853. Think of it as the 19th century equivalent of a DVD with director's commentary. Harriet wanted to show that her incendiary novel wasn't just a flight of fancy. It was grounded in the harsh truths of American slavery. This key was a compendium of stories, facts, and first-hand accounts that made Uncle Tom's Cabin look like a well-footnoted thesis. She meticulously documented cases of abuse and dehumanization, saying, "Here's the ugly truth. Folks, read it and weep." While A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin didn't quite set the world on fire like its predecessor, it was a solid attempt to silence critics who claimed she'd exaggerated the horrors of slavery. For Harriet, it was like saying, check your sources before you check your outrage. Yet, despite her efforts, the book didn't achieve the same cultural juggernaut status. It was more like a summer encore to a smash hit concert. But Stowe wasn't just sitting at her desk, pen in hand. She was out there, shaking hands, giving talks, and on occasion hobnobbing with the British elite. She even shared tea with the Duke of Argyll, an encounter that sounds more like a Jane Austen novel than the life of an abolitionist. Yet her earnestness sometimes veered into the naive. She believed that by simply presenting the facts, she could change hearts and minds. Admirable, sure, but as anyone who's ever argued on the internet knows, facts rarely change entrenched beliefs. As the Civil War thundered on, Harriet's influence began to wane, a natural ebb in the tidal patterns of fame. The public's attention shifted from literary provocations to real-life battlefields. The issues she'd highlighted were now being fought with bayonets and cannonballs rather than pens and paper. It was like the nation had moved on from the prologue to the main act, and Harriet's role, while significant, was no longer at center stage. But let's not write her off just yet. Harriet was still a force to be reckoned with, throwing herself into various causes with the kind of zeal that makes you wonder if she ever slept. She tackled women's rights, temperance, and even dabbled in spiritualism, because who wouldn't want to chat with the spirits when the living were being so obstinate? Of course, not every cause was a home run. Take her attempts at shaping public perception. Harriet often found herself stepping on rakes, metaphorically speaking, in her quest to manage her image. She'd swing between attempting to be the genteel lady of letters and the fiery activist, and sometimes the transitions weren't exactly seamless. It was like trying to wear a ball gown and armor at the same time. Impressive if you can pull it off, but mostly just awkward. Her sometimes naive yet earnest attempts to address social issues were a mix of idealism and missteps. For instance, she once suggested that freed slaves could be shipped back to Africa, a proposal that even then was about as popular as a lead balloon. While her heart was in the right place, the execution was, well, a little off. It was a reminder that even passionate reformers can have blind spots. As the war dragged on, Harriet's influence continued to dwindle in the shadow of the conflict's massive scale. The nation was wrestling with its soul, and while Harriet's pen had been a catalyst, it was now up to soldiers and statesmen to forge the future. Yet, Harriet remained undeterred. She might not have been in the spotlight, but she was still a woman with convictions as strong as her coffee, bold, unfiltered, and capable of keeping you up at night. Her correspondence during this time reveals a woman caught between past glories and future uncertainties. She maintained friendships with fellow abolitionists, like Frederick Douglass, who respected her contributions, but also recognized the limitations of her perspective. Harriet was a symbol of the complex, often contradictory nature of social progress. She was a pioneer, yes, but also a product of her time, with all the quirks and contradictions that implies. As the war wound down, Harriet's role shifted once more. She became a witness to the dawn of a new America, one she had helped usher in but couldn't fully control. Reconstruction was on the horizon, and with it came a new set of challenges and debates, ones that would require fresh voices and new perspectives. In these latter years, Harriet focused on her family and personal writings. She penned a memoir, Palmetto Leaves, about life in Florida, where she and her husband had moved for his health. It was a far cry from the moral epic of Uncle Tom's Cabin, but it gave her a peaceful retreat from the storms she'd helped stir. So, as Harriet Beecher Stowe watched the world change around her, she remained a steadfast advocate for justice, even if her methods and influence had evolved. Her legacy was secure, a testament to the power of words to ignite, inspire, and yes, sometimes infuriate. But don't tune out just yet. There's still more to explore about Harriet's enduring impact and the world she left behind. Stay with us as we unravel the final chapters of her remarkable life and the echoes of her work that continue to resonate today. And so, as Harriet Beecher Stowe watched the world change around her, she remained a steadfast advocate for justice, even if her methods and influence had evolved. Her legacy was secure, a testament to the power of words to ignite, inspire, and yes, sometimes infuriate. But don't tune out just yet. There's still more to explore about Harriet's enduring impact and the world she left behind. As the dust of the Civil War settled, the landscape of America was reshaped, both physically and ideologically. Harriet Beecher Stowe, now an elder stateswoman of literature, had seen her words turned into actions, and her ideas woven into the fabric of a nation striving to redefine itself. The Reconstruction era was a time of rebuilding, but also one of profound tension and contradiction, a fitting stage for Stowe's complex legacy to play out. Her public image evolved during these years, much like a celebrity navigating the choppy waters of public opinion today. Stowe was both revered and critiqued, a symbol of abolitionist triumph and a reminder of the enduring struggles against racism. Her role in history was frequently debated, often through the prism of her most famous work, Uncle Tom's Cabin. The novel was dissected, not just for its literary merits, but for its socio-political impact, a scrutiny that would have made even the most seasoned publicist break out in a cold sweat. Let's be clear. Uncle Tom's Cabin was both a catalyst for change and a product of its time. Its portrayal of African Americans, while groundbreaking for its era, was later criticized for perpetuating stereotypes. The character of Uncle Tom himself became a flashpoint, with the term Uncle Tom evolving into a pejorative used to describe someone perceived as overly subservient to white authority. It's a twist of fate that would likely have left Stowe herself shaking her head in disbelief. The novel that sought to humanize and dignify had, in some ways, become a double-edged sword. Yet, despite these complexities, Stowe's impact on American culture and abolitionism is undeniable. Uncle Tom's Cabin was translated into dozens of languages, reaching audiences far beyond the United States. It was like the blockbuster that cut across borders, igniting global discussions on human rights and social justice. In Russia, Tolstoy praised it for its moral clarity. In England, it was a rallying cry for reformers. The novel's reach underscored the universal appeal of its core message, the inherent wrongness of slavery and the need for empathy. Stowe's influence didn't stop at literature. Her work inspired generations of activists and writers. Figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and James Baldwin alluded to her contributions in their own quests for equality, even as they critiqued some of her perspectives. Stowe was like the opening act in a concert of social change, setting the stage for the headliners who would follow. Her legacy was complex, a tapestry woven with threads of triumph and controversy. Economically speaking, Stowe's success was a game changer. In an era when women were often relegated to the sidelines of the financial world, she proved that literary work could be both a moral and a monetary force. The sales of Uncle Tom's Cabin and its successors provided her with financial independence, a rare feat for a woman in the 19th century. She used her earnings not just to support her family, but to fund philanthropic efforts, embodying the notion that wealth could be wielded as a tool for social good. But let's not romanticize this too much. Stowe's financial success was the exception, not the rule. For every Harriet Beecher Stowe, there were countless other women whose voices were stifled by economic and social barriers. Her story is a reminder of the progress made, but also of the long road still to travel, a road littered with the obstacles of inequality that persist to this day. Now, let's debunk another myth, the idea that Stowe's work single-handedly ended slavery. It's a nice thought, like imagining a single domino toppling an entire line, but reality is more nuanced. The end of slavery was the result of a bloody civil war, complex political machinations, and the tireless efforts of countless individuals, from enslaved people themselves to abolitionists across the nation. Harriet's pen was a powerful instrument, but it was part of a much larger orchestra playing the symphony of change. Today, Stowe's legacy continues to spark debate. Her work is studied not just for its historical impact, but for its ongoing relevance in discussions about race, representation, and justice. It's both a relic of its time and a living document, informing how we understand the past and imagine the future. Uncle Tom's Cabin isn't just a book, it's a cultural touchstone, a reminder of where we've been and a guidepost for where we might go. In modern times, the story of Harriet Beecher Stowe serves as a lesson in the power of storytelling to shape society. Her ability to turn the abstract into the visceral, to make the moral personal, remains a blueprint for writers and activists alike. In a world where information overload is the norm, her work underscores the enduring power of narrative to cut through the noise and speak to the heart. So, as we turn the final page on Harriet Beecher Stowe's remarkable life, let's do so with a sense of gratitude and reflection. Her story is a testament to the enduring impact one person can have on the course of history. It's a reminder that while the pen is indeed mightier than the sword, it's not because it fights battles, but because it changes minds. And there you have it, dear listener. Harriet Beecher Stowe's legacy isn't just a chapter in a history book. It's a living story, constantly evolving as we continue to grapple with the same issues she illuminated all those years ago. So the next time you hear someone say, "Can a book really change the world?" you can confidently reply, "Ask Harriet Beecher Stowe." The rooster's crow hits your ears like a medieval alarm clock, an unwelcome reminder that your day as a 13th century falconer begins before the sun even considers waking up. It's 5 a.m. and your modest cottage is colder than a medieval banquet hall after a bad harvest. You kick off the woolen blanket, which smells faintly of last week's rain, and fumble your way to the hearth. Good luck. finding anything resembling a snooze button here. As you shake off the last remnants of sleep, let's dive into the world of medieval falconry, an art so prestigious it made owning a Rolex look like a budget option. Falconry wasn't just a hobby, it was a VIP ticket into the upper echelons of society. And why wouldn't it be? A well-trained hawk was the medieval equivalent of a Ferrari, except it could hunt its own lunch. In the 13th century, falconry was a status symbol as shiny as a brand new iPhone. Nobles and royals flaunted their birds like Instagram influencers with a new designer bag. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about the economics of keeping these avian aristocrats. Maintaining a hawk was no small feat. You weren't just buying a bird, you were investing in a lifestyle. It's estimated that the cost of keeping a trained falcon could rival the annual income of a small village. Food, housing, training, it all added up faster than you can say medieval mortgage. Now, as you step outside into the crisp morning air, it's time to check on your prized feathered companions. These aren't your average backyard pigeons. Each bird is a precision instrument of hunting, and maintaining them is a full-time job. Forget about a leisurely breakfast. Your first task is to inspect the mews, a fancy medieval word for the birdhouse. Here, your hawks are perched, perhaps dreaming of their next aerial escapade, or just contemplating their superiority over mere ground-bound creatures. You approach your favorite, a majestic peregrine falcon named Swiftwing. As you exchange morning greetings, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. Peregrines were the choice of emperors and kings, a sign that you, despite your humble abode, are part of an elite circle. But before you get too carried away with fantasies of grandeur, remember that ownership of such birds was often regulated by law. Commoners like you weren't supposed to keep certain birds, an attempt by the aristocracy to keep falconry exclusive and their social hierarchy intact. The obsession over bird ownership wasn't just about showing off. It was a way to establish and reinforce social boundaries. The more exotic and trained your hawk, the higher your perceived status. And if you think today's celebrity culture is over the top, medieval nobles would have given the Kardashians a run for their money. In this feudal world, birds were more than just hunting companions. They were a form of currency, political gift, and social elevator all rolled into one. The Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Roman II, a man so into falconry he wrote a whole book about it, would send trained falcons as diplomatic gifts. Imagine getting a bird with a message instead of a text. That's medieval WhatsApp for you. Back to your reality. You refill the water bowls and check the hawk's leather jesses. Those little straps are your lifeline to controlling these airborne predators. If only modern-day leashes came with the same level of nobility. The morning chores done, you grab a quick bite, perhaps some leftover bread or a chunk of cheese, before heading to the fields. The day's hunt awaits, and you have to be ready. As you walk the narrow path leading to the outskirts of the village, let's muse over the staggering costs a bit more. Not only did you need to feed your hawks, but you also had to ensure their health. Avian health care was an art form in itself, with remedies as arcane as they were varied. From specific diets to concoctions that would make a modern pharmacist cringe, keeping your falcons in top condition was a constant balancing act. And why all this effort? Because a successful hunt wasn't just about food. It was a demonstration of skill and status. The nobility would gather to watch these aerial displays, where your falcon's prowess was a direct reflection of your own abilities as a falconer. In a world without reality TV, this was prime-time entertainment. As you reach the hunting grounds, you join a small group of fellow falconers. Each person wears a glove that could double as a medieval oven mitt, designed to protect against talons sharper than any kitchen knife. There's a camaraderie here, a shared understanding of the art and its demands. You swap tales of past hunts and exchange tips, but beneath the banter lies an unspoken competition. Everyone wants their bird to be the one that impresses today's audience, possibly even catching the eye of a passing noble. Falconry, you see, is as much about social climbing as it is about catching the day's meal. The aristocracy's obsession with falconry wasn't just about having the best bird, but about being seen with it. It was medieval networking at its finest. So here you are, on the precipice of the day's main event, surrounded by your peers and equipped with your knowledge, skill, and a bird with the potential to change your fortunes. You take a deep breath, the cool air filling your lungs, as the sun finally deigns to make an appearance over the horizon. The stage is set, the audience is in place, and the only thing left is to see how the day unfolds. And you thought the medieval life was all plagues and piety. Welcome to the world of the Falconer, where status, skill, and survival are all for the birds. As the sun lazily stretches itself over the horizon, you find yourself knee-deep in the morning rituals of a medieval falconer. Forget yoga and kombucha. This is the real morning routine. You're not just a caretaker. You're a personal trainer, nutritionist, and PR manager all rolled into one, ensuring your feathered diva is in prime condition for today's aerial stunts. First things first, let's talk breakfast. But before you imagine your falcon munching on a medieval equivalent of birdseed, think again. Your falcon's diet is as carefully curated as a Michelin star menu. You're feeding Swiftwing a mix of raw meat that could include anything from pigeon to quail. It's not just a matter of tossing raw protein her way, though, no, this is a science. You need to weigh her food with the precision of a jeweler. In this world, a few grams off, and your falcon could decide she prefers a lazy day on the perch instead of chasing after lunch. Weight management is the name of the game. In the high-stakes world of medieval falconry, your bird's weight determines her motivation. Too heavy, and she's lounging like a cat in the sun. Too light, she's too weak to fly. You're aiming for the Goldilocks zone here, and it's a balancing act that would make even a modern dietitian sweat. The ideal weight is around 600 grams for a female peregrine falcon. Any deviation could be the difference between a successful hunt and a day of awkward apologies to your lord. Now, let's strap in for a discussion on gear. Falconry equipment is a bit like medieval couture, functional yet fancy. Those leather jesses you checked earlier, think of them as the falcon's designer anklets, essential for control and communication. Made from the finest leather, they're attached to the bird's legs, giving you a crucial connection to your airborne partner. In today's money, you'd be shelling out about $100 just for a set, and that's before you even get to the hoods and gloves. Speaking of hoods, let's dive into this peculiar piece of avian fashion. A falcon's hood is like a medieval sleep mask, keeping your bird calm and collected until it's showtime. Each hood is custom-fitted, because in the world of falcons, one size does not fit all. These intricate leather caps can cost upwards of $200 today, a small price to keep your falcon from getting spooked by the neighbor's pesky cat. The artistry of these tools is matched only by their necessity. In a time when falconry was as much about survival as status, every piece of equipment had to function flawlessly. A poorly made hood could result in a distracted bird, and a distracted bird could mean an empty table at dinner. No pressure, right? As you fit Swiftwing with her gear, let's ponder the relationship between falconer and falcon. It's a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared love of the hunt. Sure, you're the one holding the leash, but let's not kid ourselves. Swiftwing knows she's the star here. Your relationship is a dance. You lead with the gear and training. She follows with her instincts and grace. There's a trust here that's as rare as a solar eclipse, forged through countless hours spent together in the fields. But don't romanticize it too much. Medieval falconry wasn't always a harmonious duet. Sometimes, it was more like a chaotic jam session. Birds could be temperamental divas, flying off with your lunch or ignoring commands like teenagers with selective hearing. Yet, the allure of the hunt, the thrill of the chase, kept falconers coming back, captivated by the promise of what could be. So, as you stand there, adjusting Swiftwing's hood and ensuring her jesses are just right, think about the weight of those leather straps. They're not just tools. They're the threads of a bond that's part partnership, part competition. A dance on the winds of fate, where you're as likely to celebrate victory as you are to taste the bitter flavor of defeat. With your bird prepped and ready, the morning's chores complete. You take a moment to breathe in the crisp air. It's a brief pause before the day's challenges unfold, a moment of calm before the storm. As you gather your gear and prepare to head to the fields once more, remember this. In the world of medieval falconry, every day is a new chapter, each hunt a new story. You're not just living history, you're riding it, one flight at a time. As you gather your gear and prepare to head to the fields once more, the sun is now fully awake, casting light across the medieval landscape like a spotlight on a stage set for the afternoon's hunt. The fields and forests await, promising the thrill of the chase, but also reminding you of the complex web of politics and geography that governs this ancient pastime. Falconry wasn't just about the hunt. It was about understanding the land. Each field and forest held secrets known only to those who dared to tread them regularly. The geography was your silent partner, dictating what prey you might encounter. Open fields were the domain of hares and partridges, while the dense forests offered pheasants and the occasional squirrel, though catching a squirrel was more of an unintended comedy show than a successful hunt. In medieval England, the landscape was a patchwork quilt of lordly domains, each with its own set of rules, as strict as a nun's vow of silence. Hunting rights were a tangled mess, a legal and social minefield where one false step could lead to accusations of poaching, a crime that could cost you more than just your reputation. Let's not sugarcoat it. Poaching was serious business. It was akin to sneaking into a Michelin star restaurant's kitchen and helping yourself to the chef's signature dish while he wasn't looking. These hunting rights were so jealously guarded that they were often a source of tension between neighbors. The local lord held the keys to these rights like a medieval gatekeeper, deciding who could hunt and where. And if you thought this was just for sport, think again. Hunting was as much about maintaining power as it was about putting food on the table. A well-stocked forest was a mark of prestige, a sign that the lord was not just a ruler, but a provider. Now, imagine you're out in the fields with Swiftwing, her keen eyes scanning the horizon for movement. Suddenly, a rabbit darts into the open, a tempting target on someone else's land. Do you risk it? Engage in a little medieval thrill-seeking. The allure of a successful catch is strong, but so is the potential for a hefty fine, or worse if you're caught poaching. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. Penalties could include fines that would wipe out your savings faster than a bad investment in tulip bulbs. You're not flying solo in this hunting escapade. Different birds had different roles, each like a specialized tool in a craftsman's kit. The peregrine falcon, like Swiftwing, was the speedster, capable of diving at speeds over 240 km/h, making it the fastest member of the animal kingdom. However, it wasn't the only bird in the game. The garshawk, bulkier and more aggressive, was the medieval equivalent of a bouncer at a fancy club, unsubtle and effective. It could navigate the dense forests with ease, snatching prey with the precision of a seasoned pickpocket. In the falconer's world, each bird was chosen not just for its prowess, but for its compatibility with the environment. A peregrine might be a rock star in the open fields, but it would struggle in a dense woodland where a garshawk would shine. This wasn't just about preference. It was about playing to strengths, understanding the terrain, and maximizing your chances of a successful hunt. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. Falconry, like any job, had its less glamorous side. You're out in the elements, come rain or shine, and not every day ends with a successful catch. Sometimes the prey outsmarts the predator, and you return home with nothing more than a story and a damp cloak. It's a reminder that no matter how skilled you are, nature always has the final say. As the afternoon sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the fields, you find yourself reflecting on the day's hunt. The landscape, with its hidden politics and unwritten rules, is as much a part of the experience as the birds themselves. You've navigated the complex dance of legality, geography, and skill, all in pursuit of that perfect flight, that perfect catch. This is the world of the medieval falconer, where the land is both an ally and an adversary, and each hunt is a delicate balance of risk, reward, and reputation. And as you gather your gear and prepare to head back to the village, you realize that in this world, every flight is a chapter in a story as old as time itself. As you trudge back to the village, the weight of the day's experience is clinging to you like a medieval cloak in a rainstorm. Let's take a moment to zoom out and examine the falconer's place in the grand tapestry of feudal life. Because, my friend, while you might be elbow-deep in jesses and hoods, your role as a falconer is intricately stitched into the fabric of medieval society, whether you like it or not. In a world where your social status was often dictated by birthright and your ability to swing a sword, the falconer occupied a unique niche. You were the whisperer of raptors, the handler of avian aristocrats, and that came with a certain cachet. Sure, you weren't exactly living the high life, but you had access to the court, a chance to rub elbows with the big wigs, and not just because they needed their hawks to be in tip-top shape for the next hunt. Let's talk feudalism for a moment, that delightful system where land equaled power and everyone knew their place, or else. The feudal system was like a medieval caste party. The king was the host, the lords were the VIPs, and everyone else was either serving drinks or desperately trying to get an invite. As a falconer, you were like the DJ, integral to the entertainment, but not exactly the star of the show. Your skills could elevate you beyond your station, but they could also remind you of your precarious position within the social hierarchy. Falconry wasn't just about showing off a flashy bird. It was about reinforcing social bonds and political alliances. Birds were the diplomatic gifts of their day, the medieval equivalent of sending a fruit basket, except this one could catch its own dinner and impress a court. Kings and nobles exchanged falcons as tokens of goodwill, a way to smooth over ruffled feathers, pun very much intended, or solidify friendships. Frederick Roman II of Hohenstaufen, Holy Roman Emperor and falconry aficionado, famously sent falcons to other rulers as a gesture of goodwill. A well-trained falcon was worth its weight in gold, and gifting one was akin to handing over the keys to a luxury car. You didn't just give away a falcon, you made a statement. This avian diplomacy wasn't just limited to Europe. The Middle East, with its own rich falconry tradition, often engaged in similar exchanges. Imagine a medieval version of The Bachelor, where instead of roses, you're handing out peregrines. In one instance, the Sultan of Egypt sent falcons to Frederick Roman II, solidifying alliances and ensuring that even half a continent away, the language of falcons was understood and respected. But let's not get carried away with the glamour. The reality of medieval life was often more Game of Thrones than Robin Hood. For every romanticized tale of knights and chivalry, there were the realities of mud, plague, and the constant threat of conflict. Falconry, for all its prestige, required grit and perseverance. It was a job like any other, with its fair share of blood, sweat, and let's be honest, more than a few feathers. Though literature would have you believe that everyone in the Middle Ages was a chivalrous knight or a fair maiden, the truth was a bit messier. Take troubadour songs and courtly love stories, which would have you think falconry was all about wooing ladies and proving one's honor. In reality, falconers were more likely to be focused on ensuring their hawk didn't fly off with the neighbor's prized chicken. Yet, the romantic allure of falconry persists, and not without reason. There's something inherently captivating about the bond between human and bird, the dance of predator and prey, the skill and strategy involved. It's no wonder that the image of a noble with a falcon perched on their wrist continues to captivate our imagination. It's a symbol of power, of control over nature, and perhaps a touch of the divine. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting the village in a gentle twilight glow, you find yourself pondering the duality of your role. You're both an artisan and a servant, a player in the grand game of feudal politics. Your craft is both celebrated and taken for granted, a necessity for those who live by the hunt, yet a luxury for those who can afford to do so. The falconer, like the falcons themselves, exists in a delicate balance between worlds, the natural and the man-made, the noble and the common. You're a bridge, a conduit for a tradition that predates kings and castles, yet is as relevant today as it ever was. So, as you approach the warmth of your modest home, the day's events swirling in your mind, remember this. In the grand scheme of history, you're not just a falconer. You're a keeper of a legacy, a custodian of an art form that has shaped societies and sparked imaginations for centuries. And while tomorrow might bring another hunt, another chance to prove your worth, tonight you can rest knowing that you're part of something much larger. A story that's been unfolding since the first falcon took to the skies, and one that will continue long after you've hung up your glove. As you drift off to sleep, dreams filled with the promise of another day, another hunt, remember, the falconer's world is one of contrasts, of beauty and brutality, of legends and harsh truths. It's a world where the line between master and servant blurs, and where every flight is a testament to the enduring bond between human and bird. And tomorrow, you'll rise again, ready to take your place in this timeless dance, one flight at a time. As you lay there, letting the weight of the day settle like the dust on your tunic, you can't help but reflect on the endurance required for the life of a medieval falconer. It's a job that demands more than just skill with birds. It asks for a commitment akin to a knight's vow, minus the shiny armor and the songs of glory. Every day is a test of patience, resilience, and adaptability, where the stakes are as high as a falcon's flight, and the rewards come wrapped in feathers and fleeting moments of triumph. Let's start by debunking one of those romantic myths, the idea of the falconer as some mystical figure, whispering to birds in a secret language. Sure, it sounds poetic, but the reality is less magical and more about hard work and persistence. Your whispered commands aren't spells. They're the result of countless hours of training and bonding. And when your bird ignores you, it's not because you've lost your touch with the arcane. It's because she spotted something more interesting than the morsel in your glove. The myth of the falconer as a noble hero also deserves a reality check. Yes, falconry was a prestigious endeavor, but that prestige didn't always translate to a cushy lifestyle. The falconer's life was one of constant toil, akin to a modern freelancer hustling for gigs, where every day was a blend of strategy, skill, and a touch of luck. You weren't just training birds, you were navigating a complex web of social expectations and natural challenges, all while trying to keep your feathered partners in peak condition. Economically speaking, falconry was no small affair. The cost of maintaining a falcon could rival the expense of raising a horse, and let's face it, horses didn't need their weight monitored with the precision of a Rolex watch. The birds required specialized diets, care, and equipment, which meant that the falconer had to be part ornithologist and part economist, juggling the books as deftly as a jester with his balls. Now, if we peel back the layers of legend, what do we find beneath? A life that was as much about survival and sustenance as it was about status. Falconry provided a means to hunt efficiently, but it was also a way to secure a place within the intricate hierarchy of medieval society. It was a tool for social mobility, but also a reminder of one's place in the pecking order. The falconer walked a fine line between being indispensable and invisible, a role that required humility as much as expertise. Fast forward to today, and falconry has evolved from medieval necessity to modern hobby and conservation tool. While we no longer rely on falcons to fill our tables, these majestic birds have become emblematic of wildlife preservation efforts. Take the peregrine falcon, for example, a species that was on the brink of extinction in the mid-20th century, thanks to the widespread use of pesticides like DDT. Conservationists, armed not with swords but with science, launched efforts to protect and rehabilitate these birds, leading to one of the most successful wildlife comebacks in history. By 1999, the peregrine falcon was removed from the U.S. endangered species list, a testament to the enduring bond between humans and these avian athletes. In the sporting world, falconry has been elevated to an art form, with enthusiasts showcasing their birds' prowess in competitions that are as much about skill as they are about celebrating a shared heritage. Modern falconers don't just fly their birds for sport. They do so to maintain a connection to a tradition that's as old as civilization itself. It's a nod to history, a way to honor the past while embracing the present. So, as you drift into sleep, think about the legacy you're part of. You're not just a falconer. You're a custodian of history, a keeper of a tradition that has shaped cultures and captivated imaginations for centuries. Your role is to continue this ancient dance, balancing the romance of legend with the harsh realities of life, ensuring that the tale of falconry remains alive for future generations. And while you may not wield the power of kings or the wealth of lords, you possess something equally precious, a deep understanding of the natural world and your place within it. It's a knowledge earned through experience, passed down through the ages, and preserved in the flight of a bird. Each day, each hunt, each moment is a thread in the tapestry of history, a story that began with the first falconer and continues with you. As the night envelops you in its serene embrace, remember that your journey is far from over. Tomorrow, you'll rise again, ready to face the challenges and triumphs that await. For in the world of the falconer, every day is a new chapter, every flight a new adventure, and every bond a testament to the enduring partnership between human and bird. So sleep well, my friend, for another day in this timeless dance awaits you at dawn. In the bustling heart of 19th century Beijing, amid the cacophony of rickshaws and merchants, a young girl named Cixi was poised to rewrite the rules of imperial power. Born in 1835, she wasn't exactly handed a silver spoon, more like a bronze one, slightly tarnished. Yet, her rise to become the Empress Dowager of the Qing dynasty is a tale of cunning strategy and sheer audacity that even Machiavelli would applaud, albeit with a nervous chuckle. Cixi was born into the Yeh Nara clan, a Manchu family that, while noble enough to avoid the peasant grind, wasn't exactly rolling in imperial dough. If her family had a motto, it might have been, aim high, but keep the receipts. At the tender age of 16, she entered the Forbidden City as a consort to the Xianfeng Emperor. Now, don't let the title consort fool you. We're not talking about a romantic getaway. This was more like The Bachelor, King Dynasty edition, with over 60 women vying for the Emperor's attention. Picture rose ceremonies with a lot more silk and a lot less subtlety. Cixi's entry into the imperial harem was less Cinderella, more Game of Thrones. The Forbidden City was a world of rigid hierarchy, where a wrong move could mean life as a glorified maid, while the right maneuver could catapult one to unimaginable power. It was here that Cixi honed her skills in court intrigue, which, let's be honest, was more complex than the plot of any soap opera. She quickly learned the art of alliances, whispering sweet nothings, or strategic somethings, into the ears of those who mattered. Now, the Qing dynasty was no placid pond. By the mid-1800, it was more of a turbulent sea, rocked by internal strife and external pressures. The Opium Wars with Britain had left China humiliated and financially drained, while the Taiping Rebellion was tearing the empire apart at the seams. In this chaotic milieu, Cixi's rise wasn't just impressive, it was downright miraculous. In 1856, Cixi gave birth to a son, Zaichun, who would become the Tongjai Emperor. This was her golden ticket, the Wonka bar with the single coveted slip. As the mother of the Emperor's only surviving son, her influence soared like a sparrow escaping its cage. When the Xianfeng Emperor died in 1861, leaving behind a toddler emperor and an empire in disarray, Cixi saw her chance and seized it with both hands, and possibly a few elbows. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the absurdity of King Court life, a place where etiquette dictated everything from the angle of a bow to the exact number of silk layers one could wear without spontaneously combusting. The palace was a labyrinth of rituals, each more convoluted than the last. It was a world where the wrong haircut could spell disaster, and where the right cup of tea could mean the difference between life and death, literally. Amidst this chaos, Cixi's acute awareness of the ceremonial minefield allowed her to navigate with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. But it wasn't just her savvy that propelled her to power. Cixi's strategic acumen was matched by her boldness in action. After the Xianfeng Emperor's death, a regency council was established to govern on behalf of the young Tongjai Emperor. Cixi, along with Empress Dowager Xian, orchestrated a coup, politely termed the Xinyu coup, to oust the regents and place herself at the helm of power. This maneuver was as slick as a well-oiled dragon, and it solidified her position as the real power behind the throne. The coup itself was a masterclass in political maneuvering. Cixi managed to outwit the regents by rallying support from key figures within the court. She cleverly leveraged her position as the mother of the emperor and enlisted the help of Prince Gong, the emperor's uncle, who shared her vision for a stronger, more centralized authority. Together, they orchestrated the arrest of the regents, who likely never saw the metaphorical rug being pulled from under their elaborately embroidered slippers. With the Regency Council dissolved, Cixi and Xian became co-regents, sharing the title of Empress Dowager. However, it was Cixi who truly wielded the reins of power, transforming the imperial court into a stage for her political theater. Her tenure was marked by a series of reforms aimed at stabilizing the crumbling empire. She embraced Western technology, recognizing its potential to modernize the Qing military and strengthen China's global standing, though she might have preferred the term strategic borrowing over copycatting. Let's not gloss over the fact that Cixi was a pioneer in the art of political branding. She cultivated an image of benevolence and maternal authority, carefully curating her public persona. Her state portraits depicted her as a figure of serene wisdom, her reputation burnished by a carefully managed narrative. In truth, she was a shrewd operator who knew how to play the long game, her every move calculated to consolidate her grip on power. Despite her successes, Cixi's reign was not without controversy. Critics accused her of being an autocrat, a puppet master pulling the strings from behind a silk curtain. Yet, these accusations often overshadow the complex realities of her rule. In a time when women were largely relegated to the background, Cixi's ascent was nothing short of revolutionary. She wielded power in a patriarchal society, navigating a maze of political intrigue with a deftness that left her male counterparts in the dust. As we delve deeper into her life, it's essential to separate the myths from the reality. Cixi has often been portrayed as a villain, a manipulative empress clinging to power at any cost. While it's true that she was no saint, this caricature ignores the nuanced reality of her reign. Her efforts to modernize China, albeit limited by the constraints of her time, laid the groundwork for future reforms. In the end, Cixi's story is one of resilience and reinvention. She transformed herself from a minor consort into one of the most powerful women in Chinese history, a feat achieved through a combination of strategic brilliance and sheer audacity. Her legacy is a testament to the complexities of power and the indomitable spirit of those who dare to defy the odds. And so, the young girl who once entered the Forbidden City with little more than ambition and a keen sense of survival became an empress who shaped the course of a nation. In a world where change was the only constant, Cixi was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who bent the arc of history with the flick of a fan and a well-timed whisper. As we continue to explore her life, remember, behind every great empire lies a story of resilience, ambition, and a fair bit of strategic tea-drinking. With a fan in one hand and a firm grip on the Qing dynasty's reins in the other, Cixi was about to show the world how to rule like a boss in a silk robe. Let's dive headfirst into the political whirlwind of the 19th century Qing Empire, where Cixi's influence was as potent as a strong cup of jasmine tea. Picture the Qing dynasty as a ship caught in a turbulent storm, with Cixi taking the helm, steering through treacherous waters with a mix of cunning, charm, and an eye for opportunity that would make even the most seasoned pirates blush. First up, the Taiping Rebellion, a civil war that raged from 1850 to 1864 and nearly toppled the Qing dynasty. Imagine a situation so dire, the emperor might have considered trading his throne for a quiet life as a tofu vendor. It was a full-blown crisis, with the Taiping forces led by Han Ziyuquan, who believed himself to be Jesus Christ's younger brother, mind you, marching towards Beijing with revolutionary fervor and a sizable army of discontented peasants. The rebellion claimed an estimated 20 million lives, a staggering number that underscores the chaos and devastation of the time. Enter Cixi, in the midst of this chaos, wielding her political acumen like a finely honed blade. As the rebellion threatened to swallow the empire whole, Cixi's ability to maneuver through the male-dominated court became her secret weapon. She wasn't just playing chess in a world of checkers. She was inventing a whole new game. Unlike her male counterparts, who seemed to specialize in dithering, Cixi understood the importance of decisive action. She supported the formation of the ever-victorious army, a mercenary force led by Western officers like Charles Chinese Gordon, who helped turn the tide against the Taiping forces. It was a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, with Cixi embracing Western military technology to quash the rebellion. If you're thinking this sounds like a precursor to outsourcing, you're not wrong. But let's not get too caught up in the romance of it all. Cixi's motivations weren't purely patriotic. She had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, and by extension, her power. The rebellion was a threat not just to the dynasty, but to her own political survival. By supporting the suppression of the Taiping forces, Cixi ensured the stability of her son's throne, and her own behind-the-scenes rule. Her ability to turn potential disasters into opportunities was nothing short of uncanny, a blend of pragmatism and self-preservation. Meanwhile, back at the Forbidden City, Cixi's financial management skills were as impressive as her political ones, albeit with a twist of irony. The Qing treasury was about as robust as a paper umbrella in a monsoon, thanks to the costly opium wars and ongoing rebellions. Yet, Cixi managed to keep the imperial finances afloat, although floated might be too generous a term, considering the frequent borrowing and creative budgeting involved. She was the empress of austerity measures, cutting court expenses like a reality TV makeover, all while ensuring her own comfort, a testament to her knack for balancing self-interest with statecraft. But don't mistake her financial acumen for meekness. The lady knew how to throw a party, and her 60th birthday celebration in 1895 was a spectacle of imperial opulence, featuring a guest list longer than a bureaucrat's to-do list. Critics might have raised eyebrows at the extravagance, but this was more than a birthday bash. It was a strategic display of power and prosperity, a reminder to both allies and adversaries that Cixi was firmly in control. The military, too, was an area where Cixi left her indelible mark, though not without controversy. She recognized the need to modernize China's armed forces, embracing Western military techniques and technology. However, her reforms were not universally embraced, and resistance from conservative factions within the court often stymied her efforts. The tension between tradition and progress was a constant undercurrent in her reign, a delicate balancing act that she navigated with the agility of a cat on a tightrope. Cixi's reign was also characterized by her uncanny ability to turn crises into opportunities, a skill that kept her ahead in the perilous game of palace intrigue. When the Sino-French War broke out in 1884, threatening to unravel her carefully crafted tapestry of power, Cixi managed to emerge relatively unscathed, using the conflict to consolidate her position and rally support. Her critics might argue that she was merely reacting to events rather than shaping them, but one cannot deny her talent for survival in a court where the stakes were as high as the dragon-painted ceilings. As Cixi steered the teetering Qing dynasty through these turbulent times, the real story lies in her ability to maintain her grip on power in a world that wasn't exactly a fan of women holding the reins. She was the ultimate political chameleon, adapting to the constantly shifting dynamics of court life with an ease that left many of her male counterparts floundering in her wake. Her rise was a testament to the power of resilience and reinvention, a narrative that continues to captivate historians and armchair strategists alike. In the grand tapestry of history, Cixi is a complex figure, an empress who defied the odds to carve out a legacy that continues to spark debate and intrigue. As we continue to explore her life, it's essential to separate the myths from the reality, to appreciate the nuances of her rule in a world that was often anything but black and white. From the Taiping Rebellion to the intricacies of court politics, Cixi's story is one of power, perseverance, and the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to be defined by the constraints of her time. Stay tuned for more twists in the tale as we delve deeper into the life of the Empress Dowager, who ruled from behind a curtain of silk, with a mind as sharp as a dragon's tooth and a will as unyielding as the Great Wall itself. But hang on to your silk slippers, because Cixi's mid-reign was anything but a smooth sail on a lotus pond. The narrative that paints her as an unyielding resister to Western influences is as simplistic as calling the Great Wall just a big fence. Sure, Cixi had her moments of skepticism, but who wouldn't be cautious when foreign forces had a knack for turning up like uninvited guests at a dim sum brunch? Let's start with the modernization attempts, or as some might call them, the Great King Makeover. After the harrowing Taiping Rebellion, Cixi faced a country that was as battered as a war drum at a chaotic festival. The Qing dynasty needed a facelift, and fast. Enter the self-strengthening movement, which kicked off in the 1860. Think of it as China's version of a midlife crisis, complete with new gadgets and a penchant for Western-style military paraphernalia. Cixi, contrary to the myth of her total resistance, actually gave a nod to this movement. She recognized the necessity of embracing certain Western technologies, particularly military ones. After all, a bamboo spear wasn't quite cutting it against a Gatling gun. The imperial court began importing foreign cannons and rifles, and even sent delegations abroad to soak up Western knowledge like a sponge at a water festival. By the 1880, Western-style arsenals and shipyards were sprouting up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. But let's not mistake her reluctant embrace of foreign tech for a wholehearted endorsement of everything Western. Cixi was a traditionalist at heart, and the idea of a full-scale Westernization was as appealing to her as a cup of cold tea. Her vision was more about selective modernization. Take the best bits of Western advances, but keep the soul of the king intact. This approach was kind of like picking toppings off a pizza. Enjoy the pepperoni, but leave the anchovies. That is, if the pizza could also shoot cannonballs. Now, about those myths. Many historians have painted Cixi as the ultimate roadblock to progress, the empress who single-handedly halted China's modernization. The truth is a bit more nuanced. Yes, she was wary of radical changes, but who could blame her when the country was already hanging by a thread. The Opium Wars had left China licking its wounds, and the last thing she needed was to unravel the cultural fabric that held the empire together. Yet, her hesitations have been exaggerated to mythic proportions, like tales of dragons in the mist. Court life under Cixi was another realm altogether, a swirling mix of opulence and absurdity that rivaled any reality show. The Forbidden City was less a palace and more a gilded cage, where the rules were as intricate as the embroidery on a silk robe. Cixi herself was known for her lavish tastes. Her love for Peking opera performances and elaborate garden parties was almost as famous as her political shrewdness. Her penchant for luxury was perhaps best exemplified by her infamous marble boat in the Summer Palace, a structure that, ironically, could never sail. It was a symbol of wealth and stability, a floating folly that spoke volumes about the contradictions of her reign. But life inside the imperial court was not just a parade of silk and splendor. It was a place where gossip flew faster than an imperial messenger on a caffeine binge, and where alliances could shift with the speed of a courtier's bow. Cixi had to navigate this treacherous terrain with the skill of a tightrope walker and the instincts of a seasoned diplomat. She was a master of court intrigue, turning potential adversaries into allies with nothing more than a well-timed smile or a strategically served cup of tea. Let's not forget the economic context here. The King Treasury was constantly on life support, and Cixi's efforts to fund her military and modernization plans were akin to squeezing water from a stone. The silver reserves were dwindling faster than you could say trade deficit, and the pressure was on to balance the books without sacrificing too many imperial comforts. Her critics might have called her a spendthrift, but she was more like an imperial accountant with a taste for luxury. Keeping the lights on while indulging in a little retail therapy was no small feat. Cixi's mid-reign was also marked by her deft handling of foreign relations. She understood that playing nice with Western powers was crucial to maintaining the empire's stability. Yet, she was no pushover. When it came to negotiating treaties or managing foreign diplomats, she was as astute as a chess player eyeing a checkmate. She saw through the smoke and mirrors of international diplomacy, ensuring that China maintained a semblance of sovereignty amid the growing influence of foreign powers. As we peel back the layers of Cixi's legacy, it becomes clear that the stories told about her are often more legend than fact. She was neither the villain nor the saint that many have portrayed. Instead, she was a complex figure navigating an equally complex world. It's easy to turn history into a tale of heroes and villains, but the truth is often found in the shadows between the two. So the next time someone mentions Cixi as the Empress who halted progress, remind them of the complexities of her reign. Yes, she was cautious about Western influences, but she wasn't oblivious to their importance. Her legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of tradition and modernity, resilience and reinvention. As we explore further, expect more surprises, more myths to debunk, and a deeper understanding of the woman who ruled from behind a screen of silk, with a mind as sharp as a dragon's claw, and a vision as enduring as the Great Wall itself. And speaking of navigating complex worlds, let's dive into the later years of Cixi's reign, a time when she wielded her influence like a conductor with a particularly unruly orchestra. It was the turn of the 20th century, and China was teetering on the brink of chaos, caught between the steam-powered ambitions of foreign powers and the simmering discontent of its own people. If anyone thought Cixi was ready to fade into the background, they clearly hadn't been paying attention. First up, the political reforms, or as we might call them, the Qing dynasty's attempt at a makeover reality show. In 1898, Cixi temporarily stepped back to allow her nephew, the Guangxu Emperor, to try his hand at ruling. The young emperor, inspired by reformist thinkers, launched the 100 Days Reform. It was a whirlwind of modernization efforts that aimed to overhaul everything from the education system to the military. Imagine trying to swap out the entire engine of a car while it's hurtling down the highway. That's the level of ambition we're talking about. But here's the catch. The reforms were a bit too much, too fast for the conservative elements in the court. They saw the changes as a threat to their power, and Cixi, ever the pragmatic strategist, wasn't about to let her hard-earned influence slip away. So, after a mere 103 days, she stepped back into the spotlight, staged a coup, and effectively put the brakes on the whole operation. The Guangxu Emperor was placed under house arrest, and Cixi resumed control. Talk about a plot twist. It was a reminder that in the political arena, Cixi was not one to be underestimated. She had an uncanny knack for reading the room and acting accordingly. Now, let's not paint Cixi as a villain twirling her mustache in the shadows. Her actions weren't born out of sheer opposition to reform, but from a concern that such rapid changes could destabilize the already fragile Qing dynasty. After all, the empire was like a delicate porcelain vase, and the last thing anyone wanted was for it to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Yet, her decision to halt the reform movement did cement her reputation as a reactionary force, a label that has clung to her like a stubborn stain on an imperial robe. And then there was the Boxer Rebellion, a dramatic chapter that would have given any soap opera a run for its money. In 1900, a group known as the Righteous and Harmonious Fists decided they had had enough of foreign influence and Christian missionaries who were seen as cultural interlopers. The Boxers believed they possessed spiritual powers that could make them impervious to bullets. Spoiler alert, they didn't. But what they did have was a fervent nationalist zeal and a whole lot of frustration. Cixi's role in the Boxer Rebellion is a topic of hot historical debate. Initially, she seemed to support the Boxers, seeing them as a useful tool to push back against foreign domination. It's the old, the enemy of my enemy is my friend strategy. Only this time it involved a group that thought spiritual kung fu was an effective military tactic. But as the rebellion spiraled out of control and foreign powers descended on Beijing like a pack of hungry wolves, Cixi's tune changed faster than a court musician's tempo. She tried to distance herself from the Boxers, but the damage was done. The Eight-Nation Alliance, comprised of Austria-Hungary, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, marched into Beijing, and the Qing dynasty faced yet another humiliating defeat. In the aftermath, the Boxer Protocol of 1901 imposed crushing reparations on China, 450 million taels of silver, which is about $333 million in today's terms. That's enough silver to make Scrooge McDuck's vault look like a piggy bank. It was a financial burden that the Qing dynasty would struggle under, and a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities that Cixi and her government had to contend with. But let's not forget, Cixi was nothing if not adaptable. Despite the setbacks, she managed to steer the ship through these tumultuous waters with a mix of diplomacy and resilience. She recognized the need for change, even if it was on her terms. In the final years of her reign, Cixi initiated a series of reforms that aimed to modernize the military, education, and even the political system. The new policies, as they were called, aimed to reform the examination system, streamline government bureaucracy, and even introduce some semblance of a constitutional monarchy. Yet, these efforts were too little, too late to save the dynasty. The Qing governance structure was like a decrepit mansion. No amount of patchwork could save it from eventual collapse. The irony is palpable. The Empress, who had resisted sweeping reforms, was now implementing them to save the empire she had fought so hard to maintain. In the end, Cixi remains a figure shrouded in contradictions. A traditionalist who embraced selective modernization, a ruler who wielded power in a male-dominated world, and a figure who both embraced and resisted change. Her legacy is as complex as the era she lived in, a blend of ambition, pragmatism, and a fierce will to survive. It's easy to paint her as a villain or a hero, but the truth lies somewhere in between, in the gray areas that history often glosses over. As we continue to explore her life, remember that the tale of Cixi is one of survival and strategy, a testament to the enduring power of an empress who ruled with a mind as sharp as the edge of a jade dagger. Stay tuned as we delve into the final chapters of her reign and uncover the full story of the woman who was both the dragon lady of legend and the pragmatic politician of reality. As we sail into the twilight of Cixi's reign, let's not sugarcoat the situation. The Qing dynasty was more of a sinking ship than a majestic dragon. By the time Cixi passed away in 1908, the empire was teetering on the precipice of oblivion. Her final years were a frantic scramble to patch the cracks with a mix of reform and tradition, a last-ditch effort to keep the imperial ship afloat in the face of modernity's tidal wave. Cixi's death at the ripe age of 72 was like a rug being pulled from under a precariously stacked house of cards. Just a day before her death, she orchestrated a seamless transition by appointing Puyi, her 3-year-old grandnephew, as the new emperor. If you think leaving the fate of an ancient empire in the hands of a toddler sounds like a bad idea, you're not wrong. But in fairness, Cixi wasn't exactly spoiled for choice. The Qing dynasty was running out of heirs faster than an emperor could change his silk robes. With Cixi gone, the court was left in a state of disarray that would make a soap opera seem like a fairy tale. The power struggles that ensued could rival any Shakespearean drama, but without the eloquent soliloquies. Prince Chun, Puyi's father, was named regent, but he quickly found himself in over his head. The imperial court was a viper's nest of intrigue and ambition, where alliances shifted as often as the Beijing weather. Meanwhile, the world outside the Forbidden City was spinning ever faster towards revolution. The seeds of discontent had been sown long before Cixi's death, but it was her passing that acted as the catalyst for the 1911 revolution. The empire was like a tinderbox, and all it needed was a spark. When a bomb accidentally detonated in the city of Wuchang, it set off a chain of events that would lead to the abdication of the last King Emperor in 1912. Like a poorly timed firework, the dynasty that had reigned for over 2 centuries went out not with a bang, but a whimper. Cixi's legacy is a tangled web of contradictions and complexities. On one hand, she was a master of realpolitik, a woman who wielded power with a deftness that left her male counterparts in awe. Her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics was nothing short of legendary. Yet, on the other hand, her resistance to sweeping reforms and her focus on consolidating power contributed to the dynasty's ultimate downfall. It's as if she was trying to juggle flaming torches while standing on a tightrope, and let's just say she dropped a few along the way. It's tempting to paint Cixi as the villain of the piece, the empress who clung to power at the expense of progress. But that narrative is as simplistic as it is misleading. Cixi was a product of her time, a traditionalist trying to steer an ancient empire through the rapids of modernity. Her caution wasn't born out of malice, but from a genuine concern for the stability of the Qing dynasty. She was a political survivor in a world that was rapidly changing, and her story is a testament to the complexities of leadership. If Cixi's life teaches us anything, it's that power is a double-edged sword. Her ambition and strategic brilliance allowed her to rise from a lowly concubine to the pinnacle of imperial power. Yet, that same ambition blinded her to the need for deeper, systemic change. She was like a gardener trying to prune a dying tree, when what it really needed was new roots. Her legacy is a cautionary tale of the perils of clinging to power at the expense of progress, a reminder that even the most skillful leader can be undone by an unwillingness to adapt. In the grand tapestry of history, Cixi's story is a thread woven with both triumph and tragedy. She was a woman who defied the odds, who carved out a place for herself in a world that was not designed for her success. Yet, her inability or unwillingness to fully embrace the winds of change ultimately sealed the fate of the dynasty she sought to preserve. As we reflect on Cixi's impact on China's trajectory into the 20th century, it's clear that her reign was a pivotal moment in the nation's history. She was the last great empress of China, a figure who has been both vilified and venerated in equal measure. Her story is a reminder of the complexities of power, of the fine line between ambition and hubris. It's a tale that continues to resonate, a lesson in the delicate art of leadership that remains relevant even today. So, as we close the chapter on Cixi's life, let's do so with an appreciation for the woman she was, flawed, formidable, and fiercely determined. Her legacy may be a mixed one, but it is undeniably a testament to the enduring power of resilience and the indomitable spirit of those who dare to defy the odds. And perhaps, in the end, that is the most fitting tribute to the Empress, who ruled from behind a veil of silk, with a mind as sharp as a dragon's tooth and a will as unyielding as the Great Wall itself. In the heart of West Africa, where the air is humid enough to style your hair, lies the historical kingdom of Benin. Forget the present-day borders of Nigeria for a moment. This was a place where art met warfare in a glorious embrace, and it all kicked off in the 11th century. Now, If you're thinking of a kingdom built on epic betrayals and bloody battles akin to a George R.R. Martin fever dream, think again. The Kingdom of Benin was more into strategic marriages than Game of Thrones-style backstabbing. Sorry, no red weddings here, just a lot of well-coordinated nuptials. So, what's the deal with this place? Well, back in the day, before Instagram influencers roamed the earth, Benin City was already a big deal. It was the political and cultural epicenter of the region, a place where decisions were made and histories were shaped. But how did it all start? Into the Argizo dynasty, the origin story of Benin's royal lineage, which ruled from roughly 900 AD to 1170 AD. That's right, folks, this dynasty was in power for over 200 years, a feat that would make even the most seasoned political dynasties today raise an eyebrow. The Argizo, a term that translates to King of the Sky, was the title given to the rulers. And just like the job title suggests, their egos were probably as vast as the heavens. The Argizo kings were not only rulers, but also the spiritual leaders, blending the sacred with the political, a combo that's more potent than your average cocktail. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just about sitting on a throne and looking regal. The Argizo had to navigate a complex web of alliances and rivalries, where power wasn't seized through bloody battles, but through marriages. Think of it as the medieval version of networking on LinkedIn, but with more dowries and less awkward small talk. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the real estate choice of Benin City. You might wonder who in their right mind would set up a capital in a place with such relentless humidity that even your thoughts might feel sweaty. But here's the genius. Benin City's location was strategic. It was situated on a flat, fertile land, ideal for agriculture, which was the backbone of its economy. Plus, its central location allowed the kingdom to control trade routes, making it a bustling hub of commerce. It's like they picked their digs with the foresight of a seasoned Monopoly player eyeing Boardwalk and Park Place. However, the Argizo dynasty wasn't without its challenges. Internal strife was a persistent issue, and while they managed to keep their heads on their shoulders, literally, the kingdom had its fair share of family drama. According to local legends, some Argizos were more despotic than divine. Take Argizo Owodo, for instance, whose reign was so troubled that it led to the dynasty's eventual decline. His misrule was the catalyst for a significant political shake-up, leading to the rise of the Ueka dynasty, which would usher in a new era for Benin. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. What really set Benin apart was its mastery of bronze and ivory artwork, a craft that began to flourish under the Argizo rule. The artisans of Benin were the Michelangelos of their time, creating intricate works that would leave even the most stoic of art critics slack-jawed. These masterpieces weren't just for decoration. They were status symbols, historical records, and religious artifacts all rolled into one. The famous Benin bronzes, which include plaques and sculptures depicting various aspects of court life, warfare, and mythology, were more than just eye candy. They were a testament to the kingdom's sophistication and artistic prowess. Speaking of art, let's debunk a myth while we're at it. The narrative often spun is that Benin's artistry was a result of European influence. Spoiler alert, that's a load of horse manure. The Kingdom of Benin had already developed its own sophisticated techniques long before any European set foot in the region. The arrival of the Portuguese in the late 15th century didn't kickstart Benin's artistic revolution. It merely provided an additional market for what was already an established craft. So, in a nutshell, the Kingdom of Benin was a place where art met politics, and the two danced a delicate tango. The Argizo dynasty laid the groundwork for what would become one of Africa's most renowned kingdoms. With strategic marriages more than cutthroat coups, they established a stable rule that allowed culture and commerce to flourish. And while their choice of real estate might make your hair frizz just thinking about it, there was method to their madness. The kingdom's strategic location was pivotal in its rise to power, setting the stage for what would become a legacy that continues to capture the imaginations of historians and art lovers alike. As the Argizo dynasty faded into the misty backdrop of history, the stage was set for a new player, the Oba dynasty. Enter Oba Uyuer the Great, the regal maestro who took Benin from promising upstart to full-blown powerhouse. If the Argizo were the historical equivalent of setting up a startup in your garage, Uyuer was the venture capitalist who scaled it to a multinational empire. Uyuer ascended the throne around 1440 AD, and boy, did he have plans. The first order of business: fortifications. If you think urban sprawl is a modern affliction, consider Uyuer's architectural ambitions. He transformed Benin City into a fortified urban fortress, constructing massive earthworks that, in today's terms, would make your local city council break out in a cold sweat. These fortifications stretched over 16,000 kilometers. Yes, you heard that right. That's enough to circle the Earth, with a few hundred kilometers left over to loop around your favorite island getaway. It's said that these earthworks, known as the Ear, were visible from space. Now, there's a conversation starter for any extraterrestrial visitors. Why such a massive undertaking? Uyuer wasn't just into grand designs for the sake of it. This was about security and control. The fortifications protected the kingdom from external threats while keeping a tight grip on internal power dynamics. In other words, it was less, let's build something pretty, and more, let's ensure we're not overthrown by the weekend. The Ear were the ancient world's answer to both a military defense system and a statement piece. Take that, Versailles, but Uyuer didn't stop at earthworks. Oh no, he was just getting warmed up. His reign saw the expansion of Benin into a city of splendor, with wide streets, grand palaces, and artistic workshops that churned out masterpieces faster than you can say Renaissance. Under Uyuer, the city became a place where art and warfare weren't just neighbors. They were roommates who shared the same Netflix account. The artisans of Benin were tasked with creating intricate bronze plaques and sculptures that served as both decor and documentation. These artworks depicted everything from court rituals to epic battles, preserving history in metal as durable as Uyuer's ambitions. Now, let's spill the tea on art as a currency of power. In Uyuer's Benin, art wasn't merely decorative. It was a tool of diplomacy and dominance. These bronzes and ivories were more than eye-catching. They were the linked-in endorsements of the 15th century, showcasing Benin's might and sophistication to visiting dignitaries. The artistic prowess of Benin became a form of soft power, enabling the kingdom to engage in trade and diplomacy without unsheathing a single sword. This wasn't just art for art's sake. This was art as a strategic asset. Speaking of strategic assets, let's not overlook the economic backbone of Uyuer's reign. Benin was a trading powerhouse, with routes connecting it to the far reaches of Africa and beyond. The kingdom's wealth was built on a triad of agriculture, trade, and no surprises here, art. Uyuer knew that a kingdom wasn't just about military might, but economic stability. He encouraged trade in goods like pepper, ivory, and textiles, turning Benin into a bustling marketplace that rivaled the bazaars of the Middle East. Picture this: traders from Mali, Songhai, and even Portugal, all convening in Benin to haggle over goods beneath the watchful gaze of Uyuer's bronze masterpieces. And here comes the myth-busting moment you didn't know you needed. The narrative often paints African kingdoms as isolated and inward-looking, until Europeans arrived with their ships and shiny beads. Spoiler, Benin was anything but. By the time Portuguese explorers arrived in the late 15th century, Benin was already a well-oiled machine of commerce and culture. The Portuguese didn't bring civilization to Benin. They found a civilization that was more than capable of holding its own on the world stage. Oba Uyuer's reign was like a Netflix series where every episode ended with a tantalizing cliffhanger. He expanded the kingdom's territory, reformed its political structure, and even had time to dabble in mysticism, earning a reputation as a sorcerer king. Whether or not he had magical powers is up for debate, but there's no doubt about his influence. By the time of his death in 1473, Uyuer had transformed Benin into a formidable force, setting the stage for a lineage of Obas who would continue to expand the kingdom's reach. Now, if you're wondering what happened next, you'll have to stay tuned. Oba Uyuer left a legacy that would shape the fortunes of Benin for generations. But like any good historical saga, there's more intrigue, power struggles, and artistic brilliance waiting in the wings. So hold onto your hats, or your royal crowns, and prepare for the next chapter in the remarkable story of the Kingdom of Benin. And so the saga continues, with Benin standing tall at the dawn of its golden age, a time when the kingdom was about as close to a utopia as one could get, while still having to worry about the odd skirmish or two. The 15th and 16th centuries were like an extended holiday season for Benin, with trade routes as bustling as a modern Black Friday sale. The kingdom was practically a magnet for goods, people, and ideas, and it had the receipts to prove it. Enter the Portuguese, those intrepid explorers who, in the late 15th century, decided to drop anchor and say Allah to the kingdom of Benin. Now, the Portuguese weren't just popping by for tea. They had bigger fish to fry, or in this case, bigger peppers to trade. You see, Benin was known for its pepper, a spice so coveted that it might as well have been gold dust. The Portuguese were eager to get their hands on it, along with other goods like ivory and textiles. And let's not forget the human cargo. Slavery was, tragically, also part of the economic exchange. But before we get too serious, let's delve into the cultural misunderstandings that made these diplomatic ties a delightful comedy of errors. Picture this: the Portuguese arriving with their fancy armor and long beards, expecting to dazzle the Benin court with their European ways. What they found instead was a kingdom that was neither starstruck nor unsophisticated. The Oba of Benin, the ruler, treated them like just another group of traders, albeit ones with curious customs. The Benin court was polite, but unimpressed, a bit like meeting someone who claims they invented the internet. These early encounters were a masterclass in cultural exchange, with each side trying to figure out who the other thought they were. The Portuguese, initially thinking they'd stumbled upon a land of noble savages, soon realized they were dealing with a highly organized society. Meanwhile, the Benin court was perhaps amused by these Europeans who seemed to think they were the first to discover trade. Spoiler alert, they weren't. Benin had been part of extensive trade networks long before the Portuguese showed up with their maps and compasses. Trade, of course, was not just about goods. It was about influence, power, and sometimes the not-so-occasional misunderstanding. The Portuguese, ever the savvy traders, were keen to establish a monopoly on the trade routes. But the Oba of Benin was no fool and played the game with the finesse of a chess grandmaster. By controlling the supply of pepper and other goods, he ensured that the kingdom reaped the benefits of this new relationship. The Portuguese got their pepper, but not at the expense of Benin's autonomy. Now, let's talk about the fabled Benin bronzes, those magnificent works of art that have long captivated the imagination of art lovers and historians alike. Often described as mystical, these bronzes were anything but the product of magic. In reality, they were the result of painstaking labor, skill, and ingenuity. The artisans of Benin were not dabbling in alchemy. They were masters of their craft, using techniques that had been passed down through generations. Creating a Benin bronze was no walk in the park. It involved a process known as the lost wax casting technique, which, despite its name, is not about misplacing a candle. This method required creating a wax model, covering it in clay, and then heating it until the wax melted away, leaving a mold for the molten metal. The fact that these artisans managed to produce such intricate and detailed works under these conditions is nothing short of miraculous. But let's not romanticize it too much. This was hard, labor-intensive work, often carried out in less than ideal conditions. And here's where we bust another myth. The allure of the Benin bronzes wasn't just in their beauty, but in what they represented. They were not mere decorations, but powerful symbols of the kingdom's history, achievements, and spiritual beliefs. Each plaque and sculpture told a story, whether it was of a victorious battle or a significant court ceremony. They were the Instagram of their time, capturing moments for posterity and showcasing the kingdom's prowess. The harsh reality, however, was that these artworks were often the result of an exploitative system. The artisans worked under the patronage of the Oba, who controlled both the resources and the labor force. This wasn't a free market of creative expression, but a tightly regulated industry, where the best works went to the court. The bronzes were a testament to the kingdom's sophistication, but also to a rigid social structure that dictated who got to create and who got to own. As the 16th century progressed, Benin continued to thrive, its economy buoyed by trade and its culture enriched by the exchange of ideas. The Portuguese, their initial misconceptions dispelled, became an integral part of the kingdom's trading network. But they were not the only players in this vibrant scene. Traders from other African kingdoms, as well as the Dutch and the English, also sought to do business with Benin. each hoping to carve out their own piece of the pie. The kingdom's diplomatic ties were like a complex dance, with partners switching in and out, each bringing their own rhythm to the floor. It was a testament to Benin's savvy that it managed to navigate these relationships, maintaining its sovereignty while benefiting from foreign goods and technologies. The Obers who followed Uyue were not just rulers, but astute diplomats, ensuring that Benin remained a significant player on the regional stage. Yet, beneath the surface of this prosperity, cracks were beginning to show. The very systems that had propelled Benin to greatness were also sowing the seeds of future challenges. The reliance on trade made the kingdom vulnerable to shifts in global markets, while the rigid social hierarchy left little room for change. But these are tales for another time, as the story of Benin's golden age is far from over. As we wrap up this chapter, it's clear that the Kingdom of Benin was a place where art, trade, and diplomacy intertwined in a rich tapestry. It was a kingdom that defied easy categorization, thriving not because of European influence, but in spite of it. The Benin bronzes remain a testament to a culture that was both sophisticated and complex, reminder that history is never as straightforward as it seems. So, as we look ahead to the next installment, let's keep in mind the lessons of Benin's golden age, a period of brilliance that still holds many secrets waiting to be uncovered. So, as we leave behind the dazzling courts and bustling trade routes of Benin's golden age, let's shift our gaze to something a bit more robust, like a defensive wall that could make the Great Wall of China look like a garden fence. That's right, folks, we're diving into the military prowess of the Kingdom of Benin, where warfare was as much a craft as their famed bronzes. But don't expect a tale of endless battles and bloodshed. This isn't an action movie. It's a story of strategy, innovation, and some seriously impressive earthworks. First, let's talk about those fortifications. If you think building a treehouse is a weekend project, try wrapping your head around the ear, a series of earthworks in Benin's heartland. Constructed between the 13th and 15th centuries, these fortifications stretched over 16,000 kilometers and encircled the city like a protective hug from a very determined architect. To put that into perspective, that's long enough to wrap around our planet and still have enough left over to outline the state of California. And while modern engineers might have cranes and computer-aided design, the people of Benin had shovels, manpower, and an uncanny knack for moving dirt. How did they do it? Well, it wasn't just about piling up soil and calling it a day. The earthworks were meticulously planned, using a technique that involved digging ditches and creating embankments, a process that would have been as labor-intensive as a CrossFit session on steroids. The largest of these earthworks, known as the Walls of Benin, enclosed a staggering 500 square kilometers of land, protecting the kingdom's core from invasions and making any would-be conqueror think twice before launching an assault. But why go to such lengths? In a world without satellite surveillance or reconnaissance drones, Benin's leaders understood that geography could be their greatest ally. The fortifications weren't just physical barriers, they were psychological ones too. Imagine being an enemy scout, cresting a hill only to be greeted by the imposing sight of the ear. It's enough to make even the most battle-hardened warrior reconsider his life choices. These earthworks were the ancient equivalent of a beware of dog sign, but on a much grander scale. Now, let's debunk a juicy bit of historical fiction. There's a romantic notion that these fortifications were built in a sudden burst of inspiration, a Herculean task completed overnight by mythical soldiers. In reality, the construction of the ear was a process that spanned centuries and involved generations of workers. This wasn't a sprint. It was a marathon of engineering and endurance. The labor force was largely composed of local communities who were mobilized during the dry season when agricultural work was minimal. It was a collective effort, with everyone pitching in to ensure the kingdom remained secure. But fortifications were just one piece of the puzzle. The Kingdom of Benin also excelled in the art of psychological warfare. Forget about cyber attacks and propaganda campaigns. Benin had its own arsenal of mind games. The Obers, or kings, often employed tactics that were more about bending the will of their enemies than breaking their bones. One such strategy was the use of elaborate rituals and ceremonies to project an aura of invincibility. The Obers were seen as semi-divine figures, imbued with spiritual power. This perception was skillfully manipulated to maintain control. Take, for instance, the practice of the Oba appearing in public only on rare occasions, surrounded by a retinue of warriors, and adorned in regalia that would make Liberace look understated. This wasn't just about showing off. It was a calculated move to reinforce the idea of the Oba's otherworldly power. The psychological impact of such displays was profound, both on the people of Benin and on their adversaries, who often found themselves questioning whether they were facing a king or a living deity. And let's not forget the role of espionage and intelligence gathering. The Kingdom of Benin had an intricate network of spies and informants, a system that would make MI6 nod in approval. These operatives gathered crucial information about rival kingdoms, feeding it back to the Oba's court, where it was used to inform military and diplomatic strategies. It was a game of thrones, but with more stealth and less backstabbing. In contrast to today's tech-heavy approach to warfare, where drones and satellites do the legwork, Benin's methods were grounded in practicality and a deep understanding of human nature. They didn't have GPS, but they had geography on their side. They couldn't launch a cyber attack, but they could launch a well-timed rumor. And while they weren't equipped with night vision goggles, they had the element of surprise, often launching pre-dawn raids that caught their enemies off guard. But here's the kicker. Despite their military might, Benin wasn't a kingdom constantly at war. The Obas preferred diplomacy over bloodshed, using their military capabilities as a deterrent rather than a weapon. It was about maintaining stability and protecting the kingdom's prosperity. Warfare was a last resort, not the first option. This doesn't mean they were pushovers, far from it. When conflict was unavoidable, Benin's warriors fought with a ferocity that was the stuff of legends, wielding weapons crafted with the same skill that produced their iconic bronzes. Speaking of weapons, let's chat about the arsenal. The warriors of Benin were equipped with an array of tools that would make any medieval knight envious. Spears, swords, and shields were the order of the day, each crafted with precision and care. And while gunpowder eventually found its way to Benin, it was the traditional weaponry that remained at the heart of their military strategy. These weren't just instruments of war, they were works of art, a testament to the kingdom's craftsmanship and ingenuity. Now, before you get too swept up in the romance of it all, let's take a moment to acknowledge the harsh reality. The Kingdom of Benin's military might was built on a rigid social structure that demanded loyalty and service from its subjects. The warriors who defended the kingdom were often conscripted from local communities, their lives dictated by the needs of the state. It was a system that ensured stability, but at a cost. Freedom was often sacrificed on the altar of security. As we wrap up this segment, it's clear that the military prowess of the Kingdom of Benin was as much about strategy and innovation as it was about strength. The fortifications, psychological tactics, and intricate espionage networks were all part of a grand design to protect the kingdom and maintain its sovereignty. It was a delicate balance, a dance of power and diplomacy that ensured Benin's place in history as a force to be reckoned with. But don't close the book just yet. There's more to this story, another chapter waiting in the wings. As we look ahead, we'll explore how Benin continued to evolve, navigating the challenges and opportunities of a changing world. So, keep your eyes peeled and your ears open, because the saga of the Kingdom of Benin is far from over. Stay tuned, history buffs, for there's still much more to uncover in this tale of art, warfare, and the enduring legacy of one of Africa's greatest kingdoms. And so, as the Kingdom of Benin stood at the crossroads of history, its legacy was about to take a dramatic turn. Picture a kingdom that had thrived on art, trade, and a dash of military cunning, now caught in the colonial crosshairs. The late 19th century was a time when the British Empire, in its ever-expanding quest for resources and influence, set its sights on Benin. The ensuing saga would be less about noble diplomacy and more about power plays that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. Let's set the stage. By the late 1800, the British had already established a foothold in the region through trade, though it was less about mutual benefit and more about controlling the flow of goods, particularly the lucrative palm oil trade. Benin, under the leadership of Oba Ovenramwen Nagbesi, was not keen on rolling over for foreign interests. The Oba, like his predecessors, wielded both political and spiritual power. a combo more potent than a double espresso on a Monday morning. But this was no ordinary game of chess. It was one where the rules were about to be rewritten by the barrel of a gun. The tension reached its climax in 1897, a year that would forever mark the kingdom's history. The British, under the guise of a diplomatic mission, sought to visit Benin City. The Oba, aware of the potential for conflict, requested they delay their visit. But in a move that screams bad idea, the British ignored this request and marched on, resulting in the infamous Benin massacre, where several British officials were killed. This became the casus belli for the British punitive expedition, a euphemism for what was essentially a full-scale invasion. Led by Admiral Harry Rawson, the expedition was anything but diplomatic. In February 1897, the British forces descended upon Benin City with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The city was looted, burned, and its treasures, those magnificent Benin bronzes, were seized and carted off to the British Museum and other European institutions. The irony, these bronzes, originally symbols of Benin's power and artistry, now line the halls of Western museums, often presented as isolated marvels rather than the products of a rich and complex society. It's like swiping the Mona Lisa and displaying it as a found object. But beyond the art, expedition marked the effective end of the Kingdom of Benin as an independent entity. Ober-Ovenramon was captured and exiled to Calabar, and the British dismantled the kingdom's political structure, integrating it into the burgeoning colony of Nigeria. And here's a kicker for you. This wasn't just about territorial expansion. It was about sending a message, a ruthless demonstration of the consequences of defying imperial power. Now, let's debunk a few colonial myths. The narrative often spun is that the British brought civilization to a backward land. Spoiler alert. Benin was already a sophisticated society with a well-established system of governance and trade. The British were not the harbingers of enlightenment, but rather the agents of disruption, driven by economic interests masked as moral imperatives. The so-called civilizing mission was less about uplifting and more about uprooting. But out of this dark chapter comes a legacy that refuses to be silenced. The Benin bronzes have become powerful symbols of cultural resilience, sparking debates about heritage and restitution. Calls for their return have grown louder, with descendants of the original artisans and the Nigerian government demanding their repatriation. It's a conversation that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about colonial history and the ongoing implications of cultural theft. Legacy of Benin's art and warfare extends beyond museums and academic discourse. It's woven into the cultural fabric of Nigeria, influencing contemporary artists and shaping national identity. The intricate patterns of Benin's past echo in modern works, a testament to the enduring power of creativity as a form of resistance. Despite the physical looting, the spirit of Benin's artistry remains unbroken, a quiet defiance against the erasure of history. So, what do we take away from this saga? The Kingdom of Benin is a reminder of the complexities of history, where art, power, and politics intersect in ways that defy simple narratives. It challenges us to look beyond the romanticized images and confront the realities that shape them. As we close the book on this chapter, we're left with a story that resonates with both admiration for Benin's achievements and reflection on the global forces that sought to diminish them. In the end, the Kingdom of Benin is more than a footnote in colonial history. It's a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and the enduring power of cultural expression. As we ponder the legacy of Benin's art and warfare, we're reminded that history is not just a record of what was, but a dialogue with what remains, an ongoing conversation that invites us to listen, learn, and perhaps right past wrongs. So, as you drift off into the realm of dreams, let the story of Benin linger, a tale of brilliance and resilience that continues to inspire and provoke. If you were looking for rebellion in the 17th century, John Locke wouldn't be the first guy you'd pick out of a lineup. Picture a lanky, bespectacled fellow buried in books rather than building barricades. But early on, Locke showed a knack for turning the status quo on its head, in his own understated way. Born in 1632 in Ryton, Somerset, Locke was groomed for intellectual greatness from the get-go. His father, a lawyer and small-time landowner, ensured young John got the best education money could buy. It was all very proper and promising, But things got more interesting when he landed at Christ Church, Oxford. Now, you'd think a place like Oxford would be a hotbed of intellectual innovation, right? Wrong. At least not in Locke's day. Back then, the curriculum was about as fresh as a week-old mackerel. Picture long hours of rote memorization, endless Latin, and the same Aristotelian philosophy that had been doing the rounds since the Middle Ages. Locke, ever the pragmatist, found this medieval mindset as appealing as a cold porridge breakfast. Oxford, with its cobblestones and cloisters, was a relic clinging to the past, while Europe was on the brink of an intellectual revolution. The Enlightenment was just beginning to flicker, and Locke, though still a student, had a nose for the winds of change. He quickly realized the lectures at Oxford didn't quite match up with the buzz of new ideas he craved. Instead of wallowing in scholarly despair, Locke turned his attention to the real action happening outside the lecture halls. He started hanging out with a gang of forward-thinking types, the kind who'd rather debate ideas over a pint than recite Latin verses. These were Locke's people, budding scientists, philosophers, and the occasional rogue academic. This crew was more inclined to question the nature of reality than to conform to it, and Locke found himself swept up in their energy. And it's worth noting that, while Locke liked to dodge the drudgery of lectures, he wasn't exactly a rebel without a cause. He was more of a rebel with a library card, using his access to knowledge as his weapon of choice. He devoured the works of Descartes, who was busy reshaping philosophy with his radical ideas, and drew inspiration from the scientific advancements of the time, like those of Robert Boyle, a pioneer of modern chemistry. But let's not kid ourselves. Locke's rebellious streak was wrapped in the cozy blanket of privilege. Being a well-off, well-connected student at one of the most prestigious universities in the world wasn't exactly a hardship post. Locke had the luxury of questioning the system without facing the kind of existential threats that might have met a less fortunate thinker. His father's status and resources gave him a safety net, allowing him to explore the fringes of philosophy without risking too much. So, was Locke a renegade philosopher or just a product of his environment? Well, he certainly wasn't leading any revolutions from the rooftops. But for a man of his time, Locke's willingness to sidestep the well-trodden paths in search of something more meaningful was a quiet kind of defiance. As he began to form his own ideas, Locke started to see the cracks in the old order, and those cracks would eventually become chasms in the fabric of Enlightenment thought. In his own understated way, Locke was laying the groundwork for the intellectual upheaval that was to come. And all this because he chose to skip a few lectures to hang out with friends who were onto something big. Even if he wasn't quite a rebel, Locke was certainly no conformist. As his academic journey progressed, he started to develop his own ideas about government, society, and human understanding. These were radical notions at a time when questioning authority could land you in hot water, or worse. Yet, Locke managed to maneuver through the intellectual minefields of his day with a kind of quiet determination. He may not have been a firebrand, but his ideas would eventually ignite the minds of future generations. So there you have it, the early years of John Locke, a man who found himself at odds with the stale academic world he inhabited, yet who used his privileged position to quietly nurture the seeds of change. Locke's story is a reminder that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas come from those who seem least likely to shake things up. And while he might not have been the most flamboyant figure of his time, his influence was anything but ordinary. Stay tuned, because things are about to get even more interesting as Locke steps out of the shadows of Oxford and into the wider world, ready to leave his mark on history. As Locke stepped out of the cloistered shadows of Oxford and into the wider intellectual world, he found himself amidst a buzzing hive of innovation and debate, the Royal Society. Now, if you're thinking of a society full of powdered wigs and polite applause, think again. The Royal Society was more like a 17th century think tank on steroids, a veritable who's who of the scientific revolution. Founded in 1660, just as Locke was starting to find his philosophical feet, this club was all about empiricism, experimentation, and, most importantly, poking holes in established dogmas. Now, Locke wasn't just loitering around these scientific giants hoping to pick up some spare genius like breadcrumbs at a banquet. No, he was actively engaging with the likes of Robert Boyle, the veritable godfather of modern chemistry. Boyle wasn't just any old lab rat. He was the kind of guy who made chemical discoveries while you were still trying to figure out why your bread wouldn't rise. His work on gas laws and pressure would eventually influence Locke's own thoughts on human understanding, much like how Boyle's air pump experiments were deflating Aristotle's ancient wisdom. Locke, ever the opportunist in the best possible way, dove headfirst into these intellectual waters, bringing his own ideas to the table while soaking up others like a philosophical sponge. He was particularly drawn to Boyle's method of systematic experimentation and observation, which was like a breath of fresh air, or perhaps more accurately, a vacuum of fresh air, in a world stuffed with stale scholasticism. Locke saw in Boyle's work a practical approach to knowledge that aligned with his own growing belief in empiricism, the idea that observation and experience were the true foundations of understanding, not just dusty old books. But let's not paint Locke as some lonely genius toiling away in a candle-lit garret. This guy was more like a collaborative force of nature, a philosophical magpie who picked up shiny ideas wherever he went. His encounters with Boyle and other members of the Royal Society weren't just polite nods over tea. They were dynamic exchanges that shaped his thinking. In Locke's world, ideas were like currency, and he was a savvy investor, always on the lookout for the next big thing to add to his intellectual portfolio. And speaking of portfolios, let's not ignore the fact that Locke wasn't above a bit of creative borrowing. I mean, who among us hasn't borrowed a thing or two from a friend and never quite gotten around to returning it? Locke had a knack for taking ideas he encountered and spinning them into his own philosophical gold. His concept of the tabula rasa, for instance, that the mind is a blank slate at birth, wasn't conjured up in isolation. It was a synthesis of ideas floating around in the intellectual ether, polished and perfected through his interactions with others. At the Royal Society, Locke was also exposed to the burgeoning fields of anatomy and medicine. His friendship with Thomas Willis, a pioneering neurologist, and Richard Lower, an influential physician, colored his thoughts on the human mind and body. These guys were doing for the brain what Boyle was doing for gases, breaking down complex systems into comprehensible parts. Locke, ever the pragmatist, saw the parallels between their empirical methods and his own philosophical pursuits. In a world where the mind was often viewed as an opaque mystery, Locke was laying the groundwork to treat it as something that could be understood and analyzed, much like the physical world around him. And let's not forget Locke's own foray into hands-on experimentations. While he wasn't exactly inventing the next big scientific gadget, he did dabble in the practical side of things. One amusing tidbit involves his attempt to create a cure for a bout of nasty stomach troubles, an endeavor that involved a dubious mix of herbs and a rather unfortunate guinea pig, himself. Spoiler alert, it didn't work, but it did give Locke a first-hand lesson in the importance of empirical testing. All this goes to show that the myth of Locke as some solitary genius, pondering in isolation, doesn't quite hold up. He was more like an intellectual social butterfly, flitting from one idea to the next, constantly engaging with the brightest minds of his time. His brilliance wasn't just a product of his own musings, but a testament to his ability to synthesize, adapt, and refine the ideas around him. This collaborative spirit was what truly set him apart, allowing him to contribute to the intellectual upheaval of the Enlightenment. So, while Locke's philosophical legacy may seem like the work of an isolated thinker, the reality is far more interesting. He was a man who thrived on interaction, whose ideas were shaped and reshaped by the company he kept. As he moved through the intellectual circles of his day, Locke continued to develop his groundbreaking ideas on human understanding, society, and government, ideas that would eventually ignite the minds of future generations and leave an indelible mark on history. And all this because he had the sense to step out of the shadows and into the lively, chaotic world of the Royal Society, where ideas were shared, borrowed, and transformed. Stay tuned, because Locke's journey is far from over, and there's plenty more intrigue to come as he continues to carve out his place in the annals of philosophy. Now, Locke's journey wasn't exactly a straight shot from London to Amsterdam with a quick stopover for a pint. Fleeing political persecution in the late 17th century wasn't like booking a last-minute flight on your favorite discount airline. When the political winds in England turned chillier than an English breakfast in January, Locke packed his bags and headed to Harland in 1683. But let's not sugarcoat it. Locke's exile wasn't some romanticized adventure of hardship and heroism. Think more along the lines of a philosopher's extended holiday, sipping Dutch brews and snacking on Gouda while dodging the political fallout of a failed coup attempt back home. You see, Locke had become a bit too chummy with the wrong crowd, namely the Earl of Shaftesbury, who didn't exactly win any popularity contests with King Charles Roman II. When the infamous Rye House plot to assassinate the king was uncovered, Locke's association with Shaftesbury made his position as precarious as a house of cards in a tornado. So, off to Harland he went, not exactly as a penniless fugitive, but more like an expat with a penchant for intellectual curiosity and a healthy fear of the English gallows. Now, let's talk about Harland in the 1680s. Picture it, a bustling hub of trade and intellect, where the ships in the harbor outnumbered the tulips in the fields. The Dutch Republic was the Silicon Valley of its time, a magnet for free thinkers, dissenters, and anyone with a brain and the gumption to use it. Locke settled in Amsterdam, a city teeming with ideas, and conveniently, a low risk of imprisonment for his controversial views. But don't imagine Locke lounging in a drafty garret, quill in hand, composing philosophical masterpieces by candlelight. The reality was far more cushy. He lived a relatively comfortable life, mingling with the Dutch intelligentsia and engaging in debates that refined his thoughts on religious tolerance and government. Harland was a veritable smorgasbord of intellectual discourse, and Locke, with his insatiable curiosity, was like a kid in a candy store. He rubbed elbows with the likes of Philip van Limborch, a liberal theologian, and Jean Leclerc, a Swiss theologian and biblical scholar, whose progressive ideas on religious tolerance and criticism of dogma echoed Locke's own burgeoning philosophies. And let's not forget the cheese. Yes, the cheese. While Locke was there to avoid losing his head back in England, he also indulged in the finer things Harland had to offer, including its world-famous dairy delights. Because, let's face it, nothing complements a heated debate on the separation of church and state quite like a wedge of aged Gouda. Locke's time in Harland was crucial in shaping his thoughts on religious tolerance. The Dutch Republic was a patchwork of religious diversity where Catholics, Protestants, Jews, and others coexisted in a relatively peaceful truce, a stark contrast to England's often bloody sectarian squabbles. Here, Locke could see firsthand the benefits of a society that embraced religious pluralism, and it reinforced his belief that government should not meddle in matters of personal conscience. This would later form the backbone of his Letter Concerning Toleration, a work that would argue vehemently against the use of state power to enforce religious conformity. Now, it's easy to get swept up in the romance of Locke as a philosopher in exile, but the reality of 17th century travel and communication was about as glamorous as a soggy crumpet. Crossing the English Channel wasn't a breezy commute. It was a nerve-wracking ordeal of cramped quarters and seasick passengers. And forget about airmail or instant messaging. Communicating with his English compatriots meant relying on convoluted routes for letters that could take weeks to arrive, assuming they weren't intercepted or lost along the way. It's a wonder Locke achieved anything at all, given the logistical nightmare of maintaining intellectual connections across the North Sea. Yet, despite these challenges, Locke's time in Harland was a period of significant intellectual growth. It was here that he began to pen an essay concerning human understanding, a work that would become one of his most famous contributions to philosophy. In it, Locke argued that knowledge comes not from innate ideas, but from experience, a revolutionary notion at a time when many still clung to the belief that truth was divinely preordained. Locke's experiences in Harland also solidified his thinking on government. Watching the Dutch Republic's relatively egalitarian political structure, where power was more decentralized and less tyrannical than the English monarchy, reinforced his ideas about the importance of separation of powers and the social contract. These concepts would later become foundational to liberal political thought, influencing figures like Thomas Jefferson and shaping the democratic ideals that underpin modern Western society. So, while Locke may not have been roughing it in a political wilderness, his time in Harland was far from a mere jaunt abroad. It was a transformative period that allowed him to refine and articulate the ideas that would eventually ignite the Enlightenment and leave an indelible mark on history. And if he enjoyed a bit of Dutch hospitality and cheese along the way, who could blame him? After all, even the most profound philosophical discussions benefit from a little indulgence now and then. As Locke soaked up the intellectual vibrancy of Holland, he was laying the groundwork for ideas that would resonate far beyond the cobbled streets of Amsterdam. His time in exile was not just an escape from political peril, but a pivotal chapter in his intellectual journey, a journey that was far from over. With his philosophical arsenal growing ever sharper, Locke was poised to return to England and unleash his ideas on a world ripe for change. Stay tuned, because the next leg of Locke's adventure promises more intellectual fireworks and perhaps a few more slices of Gouda. As the salty sea breezes of Holland began to fade from memory, John Locke found himself back on English soil in 1689, right on the heels of the Glorious Revolution. Now, let's not get too carried away with the term glorious. We're not talking about some regal fireworks display. This was more of a political shuffle than a revolution, and it was as bloodless as the average English complexion. The revolution was essentially a fancy way of saying, hey, James Roman II, you're out, and William of Orange, you're in. This was England's way of swapping kings without the messy business of chopping heads. James Roman II, with his Catholic leanings, had all the popularity of a wet sock. And when William of Orange showed up, the English Parliament figured it was time for a change, preferably one that didn't involve religious strife or civil war. Enter Locke, fresh from his Dutch sojourn and ready to dive into the fray. He wasn't just some solitary thinker penning manifestos in a dimly lit room. No, Locke was plugged into a network of political influencers that would make modern lobbyists envious, was tight with the Whigs, the political party that had been rubbing its hands in anticipation of a Protestant monarch-led future. These guys knew how to play the game, and Locke was their go-to intellectual heavyweight. Now, let's talk about Locke's role in shaping the English Bill of Rights, 1689. It's easy to imagine Locke as the lone genius behind it, like a 17th century Steve Jobs unveiling the latest philosophy at a keynote address. Reality check. Locke was no lone wolf. He was more like the lead singer of a political rock band, jamming alongside fellow thinkers and legislators. The Bill of Rights was a collaborative effort, a political mixtape that drew on Locke's ideas but was produced by Parliament's finest. Locke's fingerprints were all over the Bill of Rights, which put the kibosh on the monarch's divine right to rule like a tyrant. The document laid down some pretty radical ideas for the time, like the notion that the king couldn't just raise taxes or maintain an army without Parliament's nod of approval. This was a big deal, considering that kings had been doing as they pleased since, well, forever. The Bill of Rights was a clear statement that the days of monarchs acting like despots were over, or at least they'd need to be a bit more discreet about it. But let's not gloss over the economic realities that fueled these political changes. The late 17th century was a time of transformation in England's economy. Trade was booming, and with it, the rise of a mercantile class that was about as keen on royal absolutism as they were on paying unnecessary taxes. This burgeoning bourgeoisie saw the potential for profit in a stable, constitutional government and backed the changes with their pocketbooks. Locke's theories about property and governance resonated with these economic movers and shakers like a particularly catchy jingle. Meanwhile, Locke's ideas on the social contract were gaining traction. The concept was simple yet revolutionary. Governments existed not to rule over people like miniature deities, but to serve them. This was a seismic shift from the notion of top-down authority, and it was catching on faster than a new dance craze. Locke's writings suggested that if a government failed to protect its citizens' rights, the people had every right to show it the door. This wasn't just rhetoric, it was political dynamite, and it resonated in a society that was tired of being bossed around by men in fancy hats. Yet, in this moment of triumph, let's not forget the quirks of political life in 17th century England. Picture this. Parliament, a bastion of high ideals, was also a place where deals were struck in smoke-filled rooms, and allegiances shifted as swiftly as the tides on the Thames. It was a world where the tea was always tepid, the wigs were always itchy, and the backstabbing was practically an Olympic sport. Locke had to navigate this chaotic landscape with the finesse of a diplomat and the cunning of a fox. And then there was the little matter of Locke's personal safety. With the political tides turning, Locke's ideas were suddenly in vogue, and he found himself on safer ground than during his earlier exile. But this wasn't just luck. It was the result of careful alliances and shrewd maneuvers. Locke knew the importance of being in the right place at the right time, and perhaps more importantly, with the right people. His return to England was a calculated move, aligning himself with the power players who shared his vision of a constitutional government. But let's not get too misty-eyed about Locke as the champion of liberty and justice. Sure, he had some groundbreaking ideas, but he was also a product of his time. His theories on government were groundbreaking, but they didn't exactly extend to everyone. Women, for instance, were noticeably absent from his vision of political rights, and his views on slavery were a bit more meh than magnificent. Locke's work was revolutionary, but it was also a product of its own limitations, reflecting the prejudices and blind spots of the 17th century. So why does Locke matter? Because his ideas formed the bedrock of modern democracy. His influence stretched across the Atlantic, inspiring the American founding fathers and shaping the ideals that would define the emerging United States. The notion that government should be accountable to the people, that individual rights should be protected, that power should be limited by law, all these principles trace their roots back to Locke's writings. In the end, Locke wasn't a lone revolutionary, but a man deeply embedded in the networks of his time. He was a connector of ideas, a synthesizer of thought, and a pragmatist who understood the power of words to shape the future. As England edged towards a constitutional monarchy, Locke's theories lit the way, guiding a nation, and eventually a world, toward modernity. And so, Locke stood at the intersection of history, philosophy, and politics, a figure whose ideas would resonate through the centuries. As the political landscape of England shifted beneath his feet, he remained steadfast, wielding his pen like a sword and shaping the discourse of liberty and governance. With the glorious revolution behind him, Locke's journey was far from over. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into his legacy and explore how his ideas continue to ripple through the corridors of power and influence the course of history. The story of John Locke is far from finished, and there are still plenty of twists and turns to come. And so, just when you thought John Locke was ready to retire to a quaint English cottage and spend his days sipping tea, he decided to unleash a couple of intellectual grenades into the heart of Enlightenment thought, the 2 treatises of government and an essay concerning human understanding. These works weren't just academic exercises. They were the philosophical equivalent of setting the stage on fire and daring everyone to dance. Let's dive into the 2 treatises of government first, shall we? Written in 1689, this wasn't just Locke's attempt to scribble down some bedtime reading. No, this was him laying down the philosophical gauntlet and challenging the status quo. The first treatise was essentially Locke's way of telling Robert Filmer, the proponent of the divine right of kings, to take a hike. He dissected Filmer's arguments with the precision of a surgeon and the subtlety of a jackhammer. The second treatise, however, was where Locke really got his groove on. He outlined his vision of a civil society that was nothing like the autocratic nightmares of the past. Here was the social contract theory, the idea that government should be built on the consent of the governed, a revolutionary notion at a time when monarchs still fancied themselves as God's deputies on earth. Now, Locke wasn't just scribbling away by candlelight for the sheer joy of it. His works were a direct response to the political upheaval of his times. The glorious revolution had seen the English throne handed over like a hot potato, and Locke's treatises provided the intellectual framework to justify this seismic shift. According to Locke, people weren't born with a monarch's boot on their necks. They were born with natural rights to life, liberty, and property. And if a government dared to trample these rights, the people had every right to toss it out like last week's leftovers. But wait, there's more. Locke also gave us an essay concerning human understanding, published in 1690. This was Locke's magnum opus on epistemology, the study of knowledge itself. Gone were the days of assuming that people were born with innate ideas planted in their noggins by a divine hand. Locke argued that the mind was a tabula rasa, a blank slate, shaped by experience and perception. Every idea, every thought, Every concept was built from the ground up, like a philosophical Lego set, one experience brick at a time. This essay wasn't just a philosophical flight of fancy. It was the intellectual fuel for the Enlightenment, the age of reason, where thinkers began to question everything from the nature of reality to the workings of the universe. Locke's ideas were like a breath of fresh air in a world that had grown stale with dogma. He was saying, hey, maybe we should actually think about things and not just accept them because some guy in a robe said so. Radical right. Now, let's talk about Locke's influence on the American founding fathers. These guys were like groupies at a Locke concert, hanging on his every word. Thomas Jefferson, in particular, was a fan, so much so that when he sat down to pen the Declaration of Independence, he borrowed liberally from Locke's ideas. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness echoes Locke's trinity of natural rights, and Jefferson wasn't shy about giving credit where credit was due. Locke's theories on government and the social contract were the bedrock on which the United States was built. The founding fathers took Locke's ideas and ran with them, creating a nation that was as much an experiment in philosophy as it was a political entity. But let's not pretend Locke was a perfect paragon of virtue. For all his talk of liberty and equality, there were some glaring contradictions in his life. Take his views on slavery, for instance. While Locke was busy championing natural rights, he also held investments in the Royal African Company, which was knee-deep in the transatlantic slave trade. Yes, you heard that right. The same guy who wrote about the right to liberty was financially benefiting from a system that robbed people of theirs. It's the kind of hypocrisy that makes you want to facepalm with both hands. And then there were his views on women. In Locke's ideal society, women were conspicuously absent from the political equation. His writings didn't quite extend the same rights he championed for men to the other half of the human race. It's as if he was holding the keys to the kingdom of equality, but decided to leave half the population outside, waiting in the rain. So, what are we left with when we peel back the layers of the Locke legend? A man whose ideas reshaped the world, but who was also deeply rooted in the prejudices of his time. A thinker whose influence stretched across oceans and centuries, yet whose personal contradictions remind us that even the greatest minds have their blind spots. Today, Locke's legacy is a bit like an old family heirloom, cherished, debated, and occasionally dusted off to see if it still holds up. His ideas continue to provoke discussion and reinterpretation. In classrooms and coffee shops around the world, people still argue over Locke's contributions to philosophy and political theory. Was he a hero of democracy, or a hypocrite with blind spots the size of the English Channel? The debate rages on, and that, perhaps, is the true testament to his lasting impact. In the end, Locke's life and work remind us of the messy, complicated business of progress. His ideas pushed humanity forward, even if he couldn't always embody them himself. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Progress isn't about flawless heroes, but about flawed humans striving for something better. Locke's legacy is a tapestry of brilliance and contradiction, of triumphs and shortcomings, much like the history of humanity itself. So next time you hear the echo of Locke's ideas in the corridors of power, or feel their influence in the fabric of society, remember the man behind the philosophy. Not just the icon, but the thinker who dared to question the world, even when he couldn't quite escape its contradictions. John Locke, the philosopher who wrote like he was running out of time, left a legacy that challenges us to keep asking questions, to keep pushing boundaries, and to keep striving for a world where liberty and justice aren't just words on a page, but living realities for all.